He insulted me, saying I don't want a kid like you, he smirked. I was shocked to see my dad laughing in a teasing way. Sorry, but I won't be taking care of you. You're in high school now, you can manage on your own, right? He added, I'm running off with my lover, so don't try to contact me again. Right after my mom's passing, my dad skipped her funeral and revealed he was running away with his girlfriend. I was deeply disappointed with him, and I didn't feel like stopping him. Go ahead, I won't reach out to you, thanks. He left the house, saying, I'm fortunate to have an understanding daughter like you. I believed we'd never cross paths again. Despite what a lousy father he was, I felt almost relieved to be free of him. Surprisingly, just 3 days later, I received a relentless call from him. I considered ignoring it but chose to pick up. Who is this? Then my father on the other end of the line said something unbelievable. My name is Emily Young, a fresh high school student. You might think I'm enjoying the typical high school life, but my home situation is far from ideal, all because of my father. He was a well-educated, leading accountant, often the subject of envy. However, his true character wasn't admirable. He had a habit of looking down on those with less education, including my mother, who only finished high school. He frequently belittled her, saying, a high school diploma is embarrassing. Without me, you couldn't survive in front of me. Despite what he said, she struggled to be financially independent and couldn't divorce him. She always encouraged me to study hard, emphasizing the importance of getting qualifications for financial independence. Don't end up like me, earn your own living, she'd say, reading books to me since my childhood. Even though my father earned well, he provided only the bare minimum, and my mother couldn't afford to buy books for me. So she often took me to the library, where she would read to me. Thanks to that, I got into a prestigious private school. However, my high-achieving father wasn't proud of me at all. He had no interest in me, not even knowing which high school I attended. His disinterest stemmed from archaic views of male superiority. Once he learned I was a girl, he lost interest. He had initially wanted a son to inherit his accounting firm, but that dream ended when my mother gave birth to me and couldn't have more children. Since then, he hardly showed any interest in my mother or me. When he was drunk, he'd insult my mother, saying, "Dan, I'm such a nice guy to marry an ugly, stupid woman like you." She'd ask him to stop, especially in front of me. But he'd get furious, yelling, "What, talking back to me? Do you realize who's feeding you, you useless woman?" I couldn't bear to watch, locking myself in my room and covering my ears. His tyranny extended beyond verbal abuse. He also had a troubling habit of infidelity. Using work as an excuse, he frequently arrived home late, sometimes not until morning. Over time, he started emanating the scent of women's perfume, which repulsed me. I'd remark, "Your perfume is too strong," pinching my nose. He'd respond with disdain, saying, "What, you think your nose is too good? Why did you wear perfume too? A woman like you can't survive without relying on a man." I harbored deep resentment toward my father for uttering such demeaning remarks to his own daughter. However, it seemed like he didn't even realize the extent of my disdain. He'd continue with comments like, "You do take after your mom with that plain face and personality. What's the use of a girl like you studying? You'll just end up a woman with too much pride, and no man will come near you." While he consistently insulted my mother for lacking education, he belittled me for being educated, claiming it was pointless for a woman to study. I considered this man truly hopeless. Adding to the frustration, he scarcely provided us with any money. He had adorned himself in expensive brand suits and watches. Even his loungewear was stylish, leading me to question the economic inequality within our own home. When I proposed to my father, "If you have that much money, why don't you buy something for Mom?" he merely snorted, saying, "It's my hard-earned money. What's wrong with spending it on myself?" He adamantly refused to spend a penny on us. It was solely because of my mother that I could endure those days. However, just as I entered high school, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. By the time we discovered it, it was too late, and she had a limited time left. Upon learning about it, I broke down, clinging to her and crying. I questioned, "What am I going to do without you, Mom?" But then, considering the situation, I didn't want to cause her any more worry because of me. Since then, I made an effort to spend the remaining time with her as joyfully as possible. When I visited her in the hospital, she would say, "Sorry for troubling you every day, Emily. You have schoolwork too. You don't need to visit me so often," with a relatively cheerful smile. I responded, "I come because I want to see you, Mom. Plus, staying at home means dealing with that drunken father of mine. I can't stand even looking at him." Hearing this, my mother's expression turned a bit sad. "I'm sorry for making you feel that way about your father. I'd always hoped you and your dad would get along." Irritated, I replied, "I'm sorry, Mom, but that's impossible. You do all the housework and take care of me, and he just looks down on you for it." My mother sighed slightly and said, "That's because I'm of no use in society." Trying to reassure her, I said, "That's not true, Mom," but she just gave a faint, sad smile. My father never visited my mother in the hospital. He rarely came home either. On the few occasions I did see him at home, I asked him to visit Mom, but he refused. "I'm busy with work. You, her daughter, should visit her. Dan, her suddenly getting sick and leaving all the housework undone is such a nuisance." Horrified, I responded, "How could you talk like that? Can't you at least worry about Mom a little?" He replied with disgust, saying, "Worry? I'm more concerned about my own future. She promised to take care of me for life, and now she gets sick so soon. It's unbelievable." I couldn't suppress my anger and shot him a glare. "What's with that look? You do realize you're living off me, right?" I wanted to leave this house, but frustratingly, he was correct. I was still a freshman in high school and under his roof. Then, a month later, my mother passed away. Amidst the grief, I busied myself with preparing for her funeral. My father insisted we didn't need to have a funeral and provided no help. However, I was determined to give my mother a modest farewell. I called him, mentioning his busy work schedule and infrequent returns home. "Hey, I've decided to hold a funeral for Mom, so please come." When did I stop referring to him as Dad? That thought crossed my mind, but I had no intention of using that term ever again. Annoyed, he replied, "Dan, I told you we don't need a funeral. I'm not going to spend any money on that, you know. I'll work and pay you back in the future, so please at least come to the funeral. I'm busy that day, plus I hate such pathetic events like funerals," he said before hanging up abruptly. I was left speechless. Despite our strained relationship, he had been married to her for years, yet he wouldn't be there for her final moments or even attend her funeral. This was the breaking point for me. I lost all respect for my father. The next day, an unusual event occurred. I thought it was rare for my father to be home, but there he was in the living room with a large suitcase. Seeing my puzzled expression, he blurted out, "I don't need a brat like you," sneering. I was stunned to witness my father laughing mockingly. "Sorry, but I'm not going to look after you. You're in high school. You can live on your own, right? I'm eloping with my lover, so don't ever contact me again." Immediately after my mom's death, without attending her funeral, my father declared his elopement with his mistress. I was completely disillusioned with him and had no intention of trying to stop him. "Just do whatever you want. I won't be reaching out to you, that's for sure. Thanks. I consider myself fortunate to have such an understanding daughter," he said before leaving the house. I believe that was the last encounter between us. Strangely, despite how awful he was as a father, I felt oddly relieved to be free of him. However, just 3 days later, I received a persistent call from him. Initially contemplating ignoring it, I eventually decided to answer. "Who is this?" Startled by my response, he stammered, "You. How can you ask who is this to your own father?" I retorted sharply, "Do you really think I still see you as my father? Are you foolish?" This seemed to fluster him even more. "Hey, you've done something terrible, you know. Because of you, I might lose my job." "What are you talking about? I haven't done anything." "Weren't you the one who said never to contact you again?" I replied casually. Then, at the height of his anger, he shouted over the phone, "Is this really the time for that? I know what you're doing." Listening to him seething in anger, I couldn't help but laugh. Yes, he was right. The predicament he found himself in was a result of my actions. This takes us back to before my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. Frustrated with my father's constant infidelity, I decided to gather evidence of his affairs by snooping through his phone. When he was intoxicated, he often carelessly left his phone unlocked, walked away, and dozed off. Swiftly taking his phone from his hand, I began sifting through the photos. There they were, numerous pictures of my father with a woman who appeared to be his mistress. I saved those photos to my phone. I embarked on a mission to uncover the identity of my father's mistress. However, being a high school student, my resources were limited. In contemplation, a close friend mentioned, my friend's cousin is a private detective. I pleaded with the friend to introduce me to the detective, who agreed to investigate my father's mistress, saying, "Okay, I'll do it for my cousin's sake, and you can pay me later." The investigation yielded intriguing results. The mistress, Natalie Grubb, was supposedly 32 years old, residing alone in a luxurious condo. "But this condo is too big for one person," pondered the detective. Delving deeper, he discovered that Natalie had a husband on an overseas assignment. My father, under the impression that Natalie was single, was in for a rude awakening. Upon learning this, I couldn't help but laugh. On the day my father abandoned me and left the house, I sent photos of his affair with Natalie to her overseas husband. Half of the photos were taken from my father's phone, and the rest were captured by the detective. Presumably, a furious call from Natalie's husband reached my father, and I could hear his agitated voice on the phone. Accompanying the photos sent to Natalie's husband was a letter stating, "Your wife is having an affair with my dad, and you knew about it, didn't you?" "Yeah, you heard right." "Well, it can't be helped." "Yes, I did it, but so what?" "I just told the truth," I responded, leaving him speechless and trembling with anger. Adding insult to injury, I remarked, "Planning to elope without even knowing she was married? That's just stupid," further fueling his fury. "What do you mean, stupid? Talking to your parent like that? What you did is not just telling a husband about his wife's affair. It's more serious than that," he solemnly stated. Intrigued, I asked in a puzzled tone, "What? What do you mean?" "That's the problem. You don't understand the gravity of the situation," my father continued, his voice trembling. "Natalie's husband, he was an important executive at a major client of my company. No way, really," I exclaimed in surprise, though I already knew. Unaware of this revelation, my father lamented in a dark tone, "Oh, unfinished. How did it come to this?" The detective's investigation had unveiled that Natalie's husband was an executive at S Corporation, a publicly listed company and a key client of my father's firm. Upon discovering that S Corp was a major client of my father's company, a thrilling sense of excitement surged within me. This presented an opportunity for revenge for my mother. Yesterday, Natalie's husband stormed into the office, spreading affair photos of me and Natalie throughout the company. Stunned, I momentarily froze but coolly remarked, "Serves you right." Quiet. You have no idea how much contempt I face from my employees. Me, the president, being ridiculed by those lower-level employees. It's humiliating. I couldn't suppress a laugh at his words. My father, always proud and condescending, was now scorned by his own employees. The irony was palpable. Soon, the president of S Corp contacted us, announcing the termination of their business relationship. Wow, that's serious. You really don't get it, do you? It's not just that. After S Corp pulled out, all my employees submitted their resignations. His words left me in shock. Everyone. Why would they do that? Because without S Corp, my company is finished. Is that so? My father's accounting firm, a small office with about 5 employees, relied heavily on revenue from S Corp. Frustrated with my father's tyranny, the employees likely decided to leave en masse once S Corp withdrew. Although surprised at the extent of the situation, It felt like just desserts given my father's actions. Natalie had left him, his employees were gone, and my father was now utterly alone. Despite his previous indifference to my mother and me, it turned out he was vulnerable to loneliness, which probably explained his repeated infidelity. Suddenly feeling lonely, he made an outrageous proposition. Well, it's fine. I was thinking of coming back home anyway. What do you mean? Well, I've broken up with Natalie, and I'm all alone now. I thought I'd come live with you. His audacious suggestion disgusted me. How could he have the audacity to return now? Living together harmoniously was impossible after everything. There's no way I'm living with you. I don't want to live with you at all. I flatly rejected his proposal. Unmindful of my disdain, he clung to the idea. Don't be so stubborn. You're still in high school, aren't you? Still a child. You should want to live with your parent, right? His statement was audacious, especially after claiming I could live on my own because I was in high school. How can he shamelessly say such a thing? Unfortunately for you, I can live just fine without you. In fact, my life would be a mess with you around. So don't you dare come back, I declared, and he grew angry. What are you talking about? That house you're living in is my house. It's only natural for me to return. No matter what you say, I'm definitely coming back. Faced with this reality, I had no choice but to concede. That's true. This house is in my father's name. So, I don't have the right to refuse him. That's true. I reluctantly conceded. Upon hearing my resigned response, he sounded relieved. Right. So from now on, let's live together as a family, just you and me. In response to his cheerful suggestion, I coldly retorted, no, it's fine. I'll be leaving. What? What do you mean? Where are you planning to go? My father asked, surprised. I'm going to my grandparents' house in Nebraska, living with you. No thanks. It's my mom's parents' place. Anticipating my father's potential return to this house after learning about Natalie being married, I had already contacted my maternal grandparents in Nebraska as a precaution. They readily agreed to take me in. My father's parents, much like him, were selfish and unmanageable, so I barely kept in touch with them. Hearing this, my father sounded troubled. Don't say that. We're the only family we have. I'll change my ways. Let's live together, he insisted. But I said, I know what you're up to. You just want me to take care of you, right? You're just worried about being alone and dying alone, I accused him. No, that's not true. Look, you said you want to go to college, right? I'll pay for it. If you don't live with me, I won't pay. Are you okay with that? Faced with his intimidation over the phone, I replied simply, I'm fine with it. What? Don't be so stubborn. Planning to work part-time while attending college. It's hard, you know. Just give up on that idea. As usual, my father belittled me. But I informed him, I have the life insurance money that Mom left me. He sounded completely taken aback. Life insurance? You mean she had a policy? Yes. After my mother passed away, she had made sure I wouldn't struggle financially by taking out a life insurance policy. She had become ill after giving birth to me, and that's when she started worrying about what would happen to me if she fell ill again and left me alone. My father had no interest in me since then, and his infidelity was rampant. She was worried that after she was gone, he wouldn't provide me with enough money for college or even basic living expenses. So she managed with the meager allowance my father gave and did some work from home without him knowing, just so she could pay for the insurance. Wait a minute. Where did the money for that insurance premium come from? She was just a housewife, right? So does that mean she used my money to pay for it? My father, stingy as ever, questioned. If she took out insurance with my money, then I should get the payout, right? I couldn't believe he'd think there's a law for that. But I told him, no, you're wrong. Mom was working from home while being a housewife. She used that money for the insurance. What? My father, who had lived as he pleased, didn't want my mother working outside and never allowed her to even have a part-time job. So she chose work she could do from home and earned a small income without him knowing. Hearing this, he muttered, I've been deceived. She was doing all that behind my back. I couldn't hold back my anger at his words. Deceived. Really? Can you believe it? She struggled so much because you only gave her the bare minimum to live on. All my clothes were bought from auction sites. I never got new clothes. I don't think she ever spent money on herself. He was silent, unable to make a sound. And yet, you are out there splurging on brand-name goods and luxury items, enjoying life alone. You're the worst. But I had to spend on my appearance for work. Those extravagances you're talking about, they were for entertaining clients, he tried to justify. But I wasn't fooled. Sure, there were some client entertainments. But I also knew about the trips and lavish meals he enjoyed with his mistresses, while never giving a single gift to my mother or me. Recalling all this thoroughly disgusted, I said, "That's enough. I've lived with you for over a decade. I know what kind of person you are. Sorry. But don't ever contact me again," I said sharply. Despite my father raising his voice, saying, "Wait," I didn't care and hung up the phone. Following that, it appears my father's company faced rapid bankruptcy. He had been misusing the company's funds for personal gain, relying on revenue from S Corporation. Once the ties with S Corporation were severed, his company swiftly crumbled financially and declared bankruptcy. Post-bankruptcy, job opportunities eluded my father, and his income plummeted. The industry quickly caught wind of rumors about his affair with the wife of an executive at S Corporation, severely damaging his reputation. Despite his pride, my father, unable to offer apologies, struggled in sales and found himself adrift. Eventually, he couldn't meet mortgage payments and had to relinquish the house. Turning to his own parents for assistance proved futile, as they rejected their selfish son. Disowning him, they declared, "He's no longer our son." Socially and financially ruined, having lost home, family, and mistress, my father now lives on the streets. Unaccustomed to failure, he appears mentally fragile and incapable of reintegrating into society. On my part, after my mother's memorial service, I relocated to Nebraska to live with my grandmother, gradually settling into a more stable life. Much like my mother, my grandmother is kind and an excellent cook, providing me with a more comfortable life than my time at my parents' house. During my days off, I visit my mother's grave with my grandmother, savoring Mont Blanc's cake, her favorite. On our way home, my high school life is thriving, and I'm enjoying happy days with friends, attempting to compensate for the challenging times I faced. Yet there are occasions when I miss my mother and find myself shedding tears. Although I believed my grandmother and others were oblivious, it turns out they cared. One day, to my surprise, she brought home a puppy, stating, "I thought it might help ease your loneliness a bit, Emily. You said you love toy poodles, right?" "Yes, I love them." "Having a dog has always been my dream," I replied, and my grandmother beamed warmly. Enchanted by the puppy's enthusiastic tail wagging and affectionate licks, I resolved to gradually increase my happiness in this way.
I could feel the anger boiling inside me as I listened to the lewd sounds coming through Brent's phone speaker. My husband's deep, throaty groans intermingled with the unmistakable high-pitched gasps of a woman who definitely wasn't me. "Oh, Brent, you feel so good," the woman purred, her voice dripping with lust. I wanted to smash the phone against the wall, but I forced myself to remain still and silent, clutching the device tightly as waves of nausea washed over me. When the call finally ended, I took a deep, shuddering breath, fighting back tears. How could he do this to me? To our family? After 15 years of marriage and giving him everything, this was how he repaid my devotion? The lies, the business trips, the unexplained credit card charges, it all made sense now. My heart pounded with a mixture of rage and devastation as I confronted the harsh reality. Brent was having an affair. I spent the rest of that night pacing restlessly, my mind racing as I replayed the sordid conversation over and over. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to scream and hurl accusations. But the other part knew I needed to stay calm, to gather evidence before he inevitably denied everything. When Brent finally returned home 2 days later, I steeled myself, forcing a tight-lipped smile as he bounded through the door with his usual charisma. "Hey, babe, I missed you." He pulled me into an embrace, his aftershave filling my nostrils and making me gag silently. I returned the hug stiffly, all the while imagining wrapping my hands around his lying throat and squeezing until his deceptive tongue lolled out. "Everything okay?" he asked, sensing my tension. His concerned facade only fueled my fury. "Just tired?" I lied smoothly, mirroring the ease with which he'd clearly been deceiving me. "Welcome home." As he headed upstairs to shower, I felt a surge of resolve coursing through me. I would uncover every sordid detail of Brent's betrayal. And when I did, he would face the consequences, severe, brutal consequences, for shattering the sacred vows he had sworn to me. Brent's carefree whistling echoed down the stairwell, but I heard only the faint rumblings of karma's approach, slowly gathering like an inescapable storm on the horizon. I took a deep breath and steeled myself before entering the living room. Phone in hand with the damning recording queued up, Brent was lounging on the couch, idly flipping through channels. "We need to talk," I stated firmly. He glanced up with a bemused expression. "What's up, babe?" Rather than answering, I hit play on the audio file. The unmistakable sounds of his aroused groans and the mystery woman's breathy moans filled the air. Brent's face drained of color as the recording played. When it finished, I fixed him with a cold stare. "Well, what do you have to say for yourself?" He opened and closed his mouth wordlessly for a moment, before regaining his composure. "Candace, that was just a stupid mistake. It didn't mean anything." "A mistake?" I laughed bitterly. "You expect me to believe that was a one-time slip-up?" Brent rose from the couch, hands raised placatingly. "Baby, I swear, it was nothing but a drunken fling during that conference in Phoenix. It'll never happen again." "Don't lie to me," I shouted, nostrils flaring. "I know about the hotel receipts, the suspicious credit card charges. How long has this been going on?" He shook his head vehemently. "No, you've got it all wrong." "Save it," I cut him off, feeling disgusted. "I can't even look at you right now." Turning on my heel, I stormed out of the room, slamming the door to the guest bedroom behind me. I collapsed onto the bed, hot tears of anger and humiliation streaming down my cheeks. How dare he try to gaslight me, to make me feel crazy for catching him red-handed? My body shook with rage at the thought of all the lies, all the times he had smiled in my face while carrying on a tawdry affair behind my back. But I refused to be the victim anymore. I would expose Brent for the unfaithful snake that he was, gathering undeniable proof to shove in his smug face. Over the next few weeks, I documented everything, poring over bank statements, installing tracking software on his phone and computer, even hiring a private investigator to follow his movements. The evidence mounted rapidly. Hotel receipts, incriminating emails and texts, even video footage of him kissing and groping the woman, who I learned was his co-worker Amber, in a dimly lit parking garage. When I finally amassed the extensive file, I waited until Brent was home from another one of his frequent business trips. Dylan was spending the night at a friend's, giving us privacy. "We're through," I stated coldly, tossing the thick manila envelope onto the coffee table in front of Brent. "I know everything." His eyes went wide as he flipped through the photos, videos, documents, and other proof within. "Candace, I can explain." I held up a hand, silencing him. "Save your breath. The lies stop now." For the first time, Brent seemed to realize I wasn't bluffing or exaggerating. The smug mask slipped, revealing the cowering coward underneath. What are you going to do?" he asked meekly. A vindictive smile crossed my lips as I leaned back in my chair. "Don't you worry," I purred darkly. "You're about to face some severe consequences." Despite the mountain of evidence I had gathered proving his infidelity, Brent continued to deny and downplay his affair with Amber. Lie after shameless lie poured from his mouth as he desperately tried to gaslight me into doubting the truth right in front of my eyes. "It was just a fling, a stupid mistake," he would claim, as if that absolved him of betraying his marriage vows. Other times he would insist, "We're just friends. There's nothing going on." I wanted to scream at the blatant falsehoods. How dare he treat me like an imbecile after I had caught him red-handed? Part of me was tempted to leak the evidence online for the world to see, to utterly humiliate him. But I held back, knowing I needed to bide my time for the perfect moment to strike. In the meantime, I began compiling an even more extensive file on Brent's misdeeds. I installed hidden cameras and microphones around the house, recording his every move. Our teenage son Dylan even helped, using his tech skills to hack into Brent's emails and messaging apps. "I can't believe Dad would do this," Dylan said sadly one day after uncovering yet another explicit exchange between Brent and his mistress. I pulled my son into a tight hug, my heart breaking for the disillusionment he was experiencing at such a young age. "I'm so sorry you had to find out this way," I told him gently. "But we can't let your father's lies tear this family apart. We have to fight back." Dylan nodded resolutely. "Don't worry, Mom. We're going to take that cheating scumbag down." With my son's help, the file on Brent's indiscretions grew thicker by the day. Incriminating photos, videos, emails, credit card statements, we collected it all, documenting his every transgression in preparation to obliterate his life. But still, Brent persisted in lying through his teeth whenever I confronted him, doubling down on his fabrications with almost sociopathic ease. "You're being paranoid and crazy," he would snap whenever I tried to reason with him. "There's no one else, you're imagining things." The gaslighting was maddening, making me question my own sanity at times despite the overwhelming proof I possessed. How could someone I had loved and trusted for so long deceive me so callously? The final straw came at Brent's family reunion over 4th of July weekend. As we mingled with his relatives at the backyard barbecue, I watched in horrified disgust as he blatantly flirted with Amber right in front of me, his wandering hands leaving no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Rage boiled in my veins as I stormed over and shoved him away from the smirking woman. "Get your hands off my husband, you home-wrecking whore!" I shouted, the vicious words ripping from my throat before I could stop them. Brent tried to defuse the situation, laughing it off as a misunderstanding to his oblivious family members. But I was done playing his game. Grabbing the thick file from my purse, I flung it down on the picnic table, photos and documents spilling out, displaying the lurid evidence for all to see. "Take a good look, everyone," I spat venomously, whirling on my astonished in-laws. "This is the kind of man your son really is, a lying, cheating scumbag who's been having an affair with this woman for over a year." Pandemonium erupted as Brent's relatives gasped and shouted in shock and anger. But I didn't care. I was past the point of protecting him or preserving his pristine reputation. He had made his bed, and now it was time to lie in it, no matter how publicly humiliating the consequences would be. The backyard erupted into chaos as I exposed Brent's sordid affair to his entire family. His parents and siblings recoiled in shock and disgust, gawking at the incriminating photos and documents strewn across the picnic table. "How could you, Brent?" his mother wailed, burying her face in her hands. "After everything your father and I did for you." Brent's dad shook his head slowly, a look of utter revulsion on his weathered face. "You're a disgrace, son. I didn't raise you to be this kind of man." But Brent didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He simply sneered at me with contempt blazing in his eyes. "You crazy bitch," he snarled, spit flying from his lips. "You're going to regret this." Before anyone could react, he lunged across the table and grabbed a fistful of my hair, yanking me towards him until our faces were mere inches apart. The stench of beer and barbecue sauce wafted from his mouth as he hissed, "You think you've won? This isn't over." I stared defiantly into his crazed eyes, refusing to show fear despite my heart thundering in my chest. "I'm done with your lies, Brent. Our marriage is over, and so are you." Dylan suddenly appeared, shoving his father away from me with surprising force. "Get your hands off her!" he shouted, positioning himself protectively in front of me. Brent stumbled backwards, nearly toppling the table with the evidence in his drunken rage. Amber was at his side in an instant, clinging to his arm. "Come on, baby, let's get out of here," she crooned, shooting me a smug look over her shoulder. A chorus of outraged shouts and insults followed them as they stormed away. Brent's brother Chris stepped towards me, shaking his head in disbelief. "I'm so sorry, Candace," he murmured, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "If we had known, this is unforgivable." I nodded mutely, fighting back tears as the gravity of the situation hit me. My life as I knew it was over, but it was a life built on lies and deceit anyway. As much as it hurt, I knew I was doing the right thing. In the days that followed, the rest of Brent's family reached out in turn to express their shock and lend their support. Even his own parents, initially defensive of their son, came to realize the extent of his betrayal as they pored over the damning proof I had gathered. We had no idea he was capable of such depravity, Brent's mother told me, her voice laced with a heartbroken waver. You didn't deserve any of this. I accepted their apologies stoically, appreciative of their kindness, yet numb to offering any absolution for Brent's actions. As far as I was concerned, he had committed the ultimate sin by breaking his sacred vows, and he would pay dearly for it. True to his vile nature, Brent remained utterly unrepentant in the aftermath of his exposure, attempting to gaslight and manipulate me into doubting the truth yet again. You're blowing this way out of proportion, he claimed during one heated argument, his arrogance infuriating. It was just a fling, it's not that serious. I could barely contain my fury as I hurled his words back in his face. Not that serious? You disrespected me, your family, our entire marriage vows, all for some cheap fling with a woman you couldn't even be faithful to. Brent's eyes narrowed to slits as he stepped towards me, his body tensed with menace. You'll regret this, he growled, each word dripping with venom. I'm going to make you suffer for humiliating me like this. But I refused to be intimidated by his empty threats any longer. I had the truth on my side now, along with his own flesh and blood, who had disowned him for his disgusting misdeeds. No, Brent, I replied coldly, staring him down with flinching. The only one suffering will be you. I'm going to destroy every single part of your pathetic life, and I'm going to make sure you deserve every agonizing second of it. After the explosive confrontation at Brent's family reunion, there was no going back. The bridges had been burned, the truth laid bare for all to see. His parents disowned him, his siblings wanted nothing to do with him, even his own flesh and blood had turned their backs in utter disgust. But Brent didn't seem fazed by the fallout. If anything, he seemed to revel in the chaos, lashing out with bitter vitriol and doubling down on his reprehensible behavior. They're all a bunch of self-righteous hypocrites. He sneered when I informed him that his parents were cutting him off financially. I don't need their money or their fake love. His callousness was appalling, devoid of any remorse for the devastation he had wrought. It became increasingly clear that appealing to his humanity was a fruitless endeavor. He simply had none left. As the divorce proceedings began, Brent fought me viciously on every front, determined to make me suffer, even as the world crumbled around him. He drained our joint accounts, attempted to hide assets, and even leveled false accusations in an effort to turn our son Dylan against me. Your mother's a lying, vindictive snake, he hissed, after I caught him trying to manipulate Dylan. Don't let her turn you against your own father. But Dylan wasn't having any of it. Now 17, he had witnessed firsthand the depths of Brent's depravity and betrayal. If anything, it had strengthened the bond between my son and I, a united front against his father's toxic influence. I don't know who you are anymore, Dad, Dylan said sadly, shaking his head. But I want no part of this ugliness. With each despicable act, each pathetic attempt to drag us all down with him, my rage toward Brent calcified into an icy, simmering hatred. I found myself obsessively strategizing, plotting out every move to obliterate him, financially, socially, psychologically. It became my singular driving force, a all-consuming quest to make him feel even an ounce of the pain and humiliation he had inflicted upon me and our family. Brent's smug arrogance would be his undoing. I would savor every moment of stripping that away as he lost everything. When the judge ultimately ruled in my favor, awarding me the house and primary custody of Dylan, Brent remained defiant, even as his life crumbled around him. This isn't over, you psychotic bitch, he snarled, spittle flying as he was led away by the bailiffs. I'll make sure you regret ever crossing me. His threats might have once filled me with dread, but now I simply laughed in his bloated, twisted face. Regret? I called out mockingly. I'm just getting started, Brent. This is only the beginning of what you deserve. And I meant every word. Exposing his lies and driving away his family and friends was just the opening salvo. I had so much more in store for the man who had so callously shattered the sacred vows between us. As I watched him being dragged away, I felt a savage sense of satisfaction, of karma being served, however cruelly. This was precisely what he deserved after the turmoil and devastation he had wrought with his selfish actions. Turning away, I wrapped an arm around Dylan's shoulders, the two of us standing united against the storm Brent had unleashed through his sins. There would be no remorse, no looking back. Only the total and complete obliteration of the man who had dared to betray our family's trust in the most unforgivable way. Whatever revenge lay ahead, he had more than earned every agonizing second of it. With the divorce finalized and Brent out of our home, I could finally turn my full attention to systematically dismantling every aspect of his miserable life. He thought he had been through hell already? He had no idea what fresh agonies awaited him. My first target was his career at the prestigious corporate firm where he had been employed for over a decade. Brent had always taken immense pride in his position and paycheck, lording his success over others as proof of his importance. Well, it was time to strip that arrogance away once and for all. Utilizing the evidence I had gathered of his affair with Amber, I compiled a comprehensive file documenting how he had been neglecting his duties and misusing company resources to facilitate his indiscretions. Explicit photos, video recordings, emails, all of it, tallying up the sordid details of his unprofessional conduct. I also enlisted the aid of an old friend, a skilled hacker who owed me a favor, to covertly access the company's internal communications and HR files. With his help, I was able to insert the incriminating dossier directly into their systems, ensuring it would be found. Within a week, the firm's CEO himself was calling Brent into his office, the file of evidence splayed out on the desk between them. "What is the meaning of this, Brent?" The CEO's voice could be heard saying sternly over the recording I had my hacker obtain. "This is utterly unacceptable behavior for one of our senior executives. Sir, I can explain." Brent stuttered, suddenly sounding very small. "Explain what?" the CEO interrupted sharply. "These photos, videos, all this proof of you carrying on illicit affairs and neglecting your responsibilities, using company property for your indecent trysts?" There was a pause, and I could practically see Brent squirming in discomfort. Good. Let him feel just an ounce of the shame and humiliation he deserved. "You're fired, effective immediately," the CEO stated, his voice laced with finality and disgust. "Security will escort you off the premises. I want you gone within the hour." The recording clicked off, and I felt a savage surge of satisfaction. That high-paying job, that status and sense of self-worth Brent derived from his career, all of it gone in an instant because of his own reprehensible actions. But I wasn't done by any means. No, this was just the start of his downfall. Next, I recruited Dylan's help to release the entire file across Brent's social media accounts and professional networking sites like LinkedIn. Within hours, the lurid details of his infidelity went viral as outraged friends, family, and colleagues shared and reacted in shock and horror. Amber's husband even reached out, thanking me profusely after discovering the truth about his wife's tawdry dalliances. Their divorce proceedings began immediately. As for Brent, his phone was blowing up constantly with anguished texts and voice messages from all corners of his life. Parents disowning him, friends cutting ties, colleagues aghast at his indecent behavior. In one particularly satisfying instance, I patched his mother's tearful tirade onto the house speakers so we could both savor every blistering second of it. "You were my pride and joy," the woman wept brokenly. "But now, you're nothing to me, nothing but a filthy, immoral disappointment." I could see it all clicking into place for Brent in that moment, the total and complete ruination I had meticulously orchestrated. His entire world was crumbling into ashes before his very eyes. When he finally looked up at me with naked fear and loathing, I simply smiled. "Like I told you before," I said calmly, "this is only the beginning of what you deserve." With Brent's career, reputation, and family ties in ruins, I turned my sights to obliterating what little he had left, his finances and assets. He would be left with nothing, forced to start from less than zero after the hell I put him through. It began with liquidating our joint accounts and investment portfolios that I had access to through our marriage. Hundreds of thousands of dollars drained in a matter of days, transferred discreetly to offshore holdings where he could never trace it. "What did you do?" Brent demanded frantically when he realized our nest egg was gone. "Where's all our money?" I simply smiled placidly. Considering how I earned every penny of that while you were gallivanting with your whores, I'd say it's finders keepers. His face purpled with rage, but I was prepared for his outburst. With a flick of my wrist, I produced a crisp manila envelope, a dossier detailing every single asset in his name that I intended to systematically demolish. "This is just a taste of what's coming for you," I said coolly. "You're going to lose it all by the time I'm through." True to my word, I deployed every underhanded tactic in the book to unravel the few holdings Brent had managed to siphon away and hide from me. With Dylan's tech-savvy assistance, we relentlessly hacked and probed until we discovered every last possession he tried to salt away. The classic '68 Mustang he had lovingly restored? Reported as a stolen vehicle until it was seized. The private investment funds he had stashed overseas? Drained away by my hacker contacts until not a cent remained. Even the house he tried to rent after being forced from our marital home. I made sure the landlord received an anonymous tip that Brent was an adulterer of the worst kind. He was kicked out within a month. With each successive blow I landed, stripping away his assets and driving him towards bankruptcy, the fight seemed to gradually drain from Brent's body. What was once a sneering, arrogant puffery became a hunched, haggard shell of a man. He would call or text me at all hours, devolving from bitter threats to pathetic pleadings as his life crumbled around him. "Candace, please?" He sobbed one night during a tear-filled voicemail. "I'm so sorry for what I did. You have to stop this. I have nothing left. I'll be destitute." I listened to the message impassively before deleting it without a shred of remorse. Brent's suffering was a calculated, perfectly engineered campaign, and it was nowhere near finished. When his car was finally repossessed and his cell phone cut off for lack of payment, he started showing up at my doorstep, begging to be let inside. "I have nowhere to go," he wailed, pounding on the door with gnarly fists. "You've taken everything from me. Why are you doing this?" I watched him through the security camera, taking perverse satisfaction in his total and complete debasement. This was the great Brent Connors, the corporate hotshot and arrogant cheater, reduced to a sniveling, desperate husk. When Dylan emerged from his room to see what the commotion was, I waved him off. "Don't bother," I told my son calmly. "He's just reaping what he's sown. That's all." My final salvo came in the form of a massive data dump to the IRS. Records upon records of Brent's financial misdeeds, from tax evasion to money laundering. Within days, the authorities were at his ramshackle motel room with warrants and cuffs. The sight of his utter humiliation as they hauled him away almost made the entire grueling process worth it. Almost. Months passed as the full weight of my revenge campaign against Brent took hold. With each day that went by, he plummeted further into the abyss of destitution and ruin I had meticulously constructed. The corporate job, the money, the family, the home, it had all been systematically stripped away through my calculated efforts. Even his freedom was temporarily revoked after that IRS raid, though his high-priced lawyers managed to get the charges reduced to a slap on the wrist. But it didn't matter. The damage was already done. Brent was a shell of his former arrogant self, having lost every single thing that had once brought him swagger and self-worth. I savored every agonizing second as the proud, selfish man who had so callously shattered his marriage vows was ground down into broken submission. This was karma's bitter reward for his sins against me and our family. Dylan and I, meanwhile, were finally able to start fresh without the toxic weight of Brent's betrayal dragging us down. With my revenge complete and his own misdeeds having alienated him from everyone he knew, he was officially expunged from our lives like the cancer he was. We moved from our old home into a new place. A clean slate for just the two of us to begin rebuilding. Dylan seemed to thrive without his father's negative influence, excelling in school and landing a prestigious internship in software engineering. As for me, I had never felt more liberated and vindicated. The rage that had fueled my quest for vengeance had burned itself out, leaving only a sense of tranquility and peace in its wake. That is, until the incessant phone calls and unwanted visits began. At first, Brent's attempts to reach out were easy enough to ignore. Drunken voicemails pleading for mercy or hurling bitter curses that he had brought upon himself. I would simply delete the messages without a second thought. But then he started showing up in person, loitering outside our new home or accosting us in public with his disheveled, haunted appearance. Each time I saw that sunken, desperate look in his roomy eyes, any lingering pity I might have felt quickly evaporated. "I have nothing left because of you," he sobbed during one such confrontation outside the grocery store. "You've destroyed me completely." Grabbing my arm with shocking force, Brent stared at me with an almost feral desperation. "Please, give me another chance," he begged hoarsely. "I'll do anything, Candace. Anything to get my life back." I could feel Dylan tense beside me, ready to intervene, but I simply wrenched my arm free of Brent's grasp and stared at him with utter contempt. "Your life?" I spat out a bitter laugh. "This is exactly what you deserve after throwing away the life we had for some cheap fling. You did this to yourself." Brent opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off with a savage glare. "I gave you chance after chance to come clean, to make things right," I said, voice low and laced with venom. "But you just couldn't stop lying and cheating, could you? You chose this path, and I made sure you suffered every agonizing step of the way." Straightening up, I turned and began walking back towards the car where Dylan waited, leaving Brent crumpled on the sidewalk like the pathetic, broken shell of a man he had become. As we drove off, I felt an immense weight finally lift from my shoulders. The long, arduous road towards justice and reclaiming my life had finally reached its conclusion. Brent was neutralized, relegated to a cautionary tale of how swiftly karma can dismantle even the proudest of narcissists. I looked over at Dylan, my strong, resilient son, and smiled. We had each other, and that was enough to forge ahead into our new chapter, free of Brent's toxicity at long last. No more looking back, only moving forward, towards the fresh start this long-overdue vengeance had afforded us. The morning started like any other. I rolled out of bed, the familiar sounds of my husband Jordan's gentle snoring filling the room. Padding across the cool hardwood floors, I made my way to the bathroom and splashed some water on my face, trying to shake off the lingering grogginess. As I glanced in the mirror, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. A faint spotting, barely noticeable, but enough to set off alarm bells in my mind. I tried to push the worries aside, telling myself it was probably nothing, but deep down, I knew better. Jordan and I had been trying for a baby for over a year now, and the constant disappointment had started to take its toll. Every month, the same cycle of hope followed by crushing despair. I tried to stay positive, focusing on my job as an elementary school teacher, but the longing for a child of our own was becoming harder and harder to ignore. Over breakfast, I debated whether or not to bring up my concerns to Jordan. He was always so supportive, but I could see the frustration in his eyes whenever the topic of children came up. It was as if he was starting to doubt whether it would ever happen for us. "Everything okay, babe?" Jordan asked, picking up on my distant gaze. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just lost in thought." He reached across the table and gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "Don't worry, it'll happen for us. We just have to be patient." His words were reassuring, but I couldn't help but feel a twinge of doubt. What if something was wrong with me? What if I could never give Jordan the family he so desperately wanted? The day passed in a blur, my mind constantly drifting back to the spotting and the nagging fear that something wasn't right. By the time I got home from work, I had made up my mind. I needed to see a doctor, if only for peace of mind. Jordan was supportive, as always, but I could see the concern etched across his face. We sat in the doctor's office, holding hands tightly, bracing ourselves for whatever news was to come. "Mrs. West," the doctor said, her voice somber, "the tests indicate that you're experiencing early ovarian aging. It's a condition that can make it difficult, if not impossible, to conceive naturally." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. Impossible to conceive. My world came crashing down around me as I struggled to process the news. Jordan pulled me close, whispering reassurances in my ear, but I could sense a shift in his demeanor. A flicker of doubt, of disappointment that he quickly tried to mask. As we drove home in silence, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of the end for us. Could our love survive this devastating blow, or would the strain of infertility be too much for us to bear? Over the next few months, Jordan and I tried to remain positive, exploring every possible treatment option. He was supportive at first, holding my hand through the grueling rounds of fertility drugs and the invasive procedures that left me emotionally and physically drained. "We'll get through this together," he would say, pulling me close after another disappointing negative test result. But as time went on, I could sense a subtle shift in his demeanor. The reassuring smiles became more forced, the comforting words rang a little hollower. It was as if the constant disappointment was starting to wear him down too. One night, after another failed attempt at conceiving, Jordan let his guard down. "I just don't understand why this is so difficult," he muttered, his voice laced with frustration. "My parents had 4 kids without even trying." The words stung, reminding me of my own perceived inadequacy. I tried to brush it off, but the comment lingered in the back of my mind, planting seeds of doubt that would only continue to grow. As the weeks turned into months, the distance between us seemed to widen. Jordan began to bury himself in his work, coming home late and retreating to his home office for hours on end. I tried to be understanding, knowing that he was dealing with his own disappointment in his own way, but the loneliness was becoming unbearable. One night, as I was cleaning up after dinner, I noticed Jordan's phone lighting up with a text notification. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but something made me pause. A nagging feeling, a voice in the back of my mind telling me to take a closer look. I shouldn't have done it. I knew it was a violation of his privacy, but the temptation was too strong. I picked up his phone and felt my heart sink as I read the message. "Can't wait to see you tonight, babe. I'll bring the wine." The words seemed to jump off the screen, taunting me with their implications. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the rest of the conversation, each message more damning than the last. Jordan came home a few hours later, his eyes glazed over and his movements unsteady. The smell of perfume lingered on his clothes, a scent that wasn't mine. "Where have you been?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. He looked at me, his expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Out with some colleagues from work, we had a few drinks to celebrate a project launch." The lie was so blatant, so transparent, that it only added insult to injury. I wanted to scream, to rage against the betrayal, but the words caught in my throat. "I know about the texts, Jordan," I finally managed to choke out. "I know you're seeing someone else." For a moment he looked stunned, like a deer caught in the headlights. Then his expression hardened, and he let out a bitter laugh. "Is that what you think?" he sneered. "Maybe if you could give me a child, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere for satisfaction." The cruelty of his words cut me to the core. In that moment, I saw the true depths of his selfishness, his willingness to place all the blame on me for our struggles. As he stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind him, I sank to the floor, tears streaming down my face. The man I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone cold and callous, someone capable of the ultimate betrayal. But even in my grief, a spark of determination began to flicker within me. Jordan may have thought he had the upper hand, but he had no idea what I was capable of. The game was just beginning, and I intended to play to win. The revelation of Jordan's infidelity hit me like a ton of bricks, but I refused to let it break me. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself retreating into a shell, isolating myself from friends and family as I grappled with the pain and betrayal. Jordan, for his part, seemed wholly unrepentant. He would come and go as he pleased, spending more and more time away from home, no doubt in the company of his mistress. The few times we did cross paths, the air was thick with tension and unspoken accusations. "Why are you doing this to us?" I finally worked up the courage to ask one evening as he was heading out the door. He paused, his hand on the doorknob, and turned to face me with a cold, emotionless stare. "Maybe if you could give me what I really want, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere." The words cut deep, but I refused to let him see how much they hurt me. Instead, I met his gaze with a steely determination, silently vowing that he would pay for his cruelty. As the weeks dragged on, Jordan became increasingly brazen in his deception. He would come home late, reeking of cheap perfume and alcohol, and stumble off to bed without so much as a word. It was as if he had completely given up on even trying to hide his indiscretions. One night, as I sat alone in our living room, staring blankly at the flickering TV screen, I heard a faint, buzzing noise. It took me a moment to realize it was coming from Jordan's jacket pocket, which he had carelessly tossed over the back of the couch. Part of me knew I shouldn't look, that I was only setting myself up for more heartache. But another, more primal part of me couldn't resist the temptation. With trembling hands, I reached into the pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen was lit up with a string of text messages, each one more damning than the last, explicit photos, suggestive comments, and promises of secret rendezvous that made my stomach churn. As I scrolled through the messages, a sense of rage began to build within me. How dare he? How dare he betray me in such a callous, brazen way? The man I had once loved, the man I had vowed to stand by through thick and thin, was nothing more than a snake in the grass, a selfish, deceitful coward. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit idly by and let Jordan continue to humiliate and disrespect me. No, it was time to take matters into my own hands. If he wanted to play games, then I would play too, and I would make sure I came out on top. From that moment on, I became a woman possessed. I started keeping a meticulous log of Jordan's comings and goings, documenting his every lie and indiscretion. I gathered evidence, screenshots of the damning text messages, receipts for expensive gifts and hotel rooms that he had no doubt charged to our joint account. And all the while, I played the part of the oblivious, dutiful wife, lulling Jordan into a false sense of security. He had no idea that the ground was shifting beneath his feet, that his carefully constructed web of lies was about to come crashing down around him. It was a dangerous game I was playing, but I was fueled by a burning desire for justice, for revenge. Jordan had made a grave mistake in underestimating me, and he was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Little did he know, the true storm was only just beginning to brew. As the weeks passed, I found myself becoming consumed by my quest for revenge, meticulously gathering evidence of Jordan's misdeeds. But even as I built my case against him, a part of me still clung to the hope that it was all some terrible misunderstanding. That hope was shattered one night at a neighborhood party. Jordan and I had agreed to make an appearance, putting on a united front for the sake of appearances. As we mingled with our friends and neighbors, making small talk and sipping lukewarm beer, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her. A petite blonde woman, no older than 25, sauntering across the room with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Our eyes met briefly, and she flashed me a sickly sweet smile that sent a chill down my spine. "Who's that?" I asked Jordan, trying to keep my voice casual. He followed my gaze, and I saw his expression shift ever so slightly. "Oh, that's Kaylee. She's new to the neighborhood." The way he said her name, the slight catch in his breath, told me everything I needed to know. This was the woman he had been seeing, the one he had been sneaking around with behind my back. As the party wore on, I found myself unable to take my eyes off of Kaylee. She moved through the crowd with ease, flirting shamelessly with any man who crossed her path, including Jordan. At one point, I caught them engaged in what appeared to be a heated conversation, their faces inches apart as they whispered back and forth. Kaylee's hand lingered a little too long on Jordan's arm, and I felt a surge of jealousy and anger coursing through my veins. When Jordan finally broke away and made his way back to me, I couldn't hold my tongue any longer. "So, who is she really?" I asked, my voice low and laced with accusation. Jordan's eyes widened, and he quickly tried to compose himself. "She's just a neighbor, babe. I was welcoming her to the community." The lie was so blatant, so insulting, that I felt myself shaking with rage. "Don't treat me like an idiot, Jordan. I saw the way she was touching you, the way you were looking at her." For a moment, he seemed caught off guard, like a deer in the headlights. Then his expression hardened, and he let out a bitter laugh. "You want to know the truth?" he spat. "She's the woman who's going to give me what you can't. A family." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I stumbled back, my vision blurring with tears as the weight of his betrayal crashed down upon me. Jordan must have seen the pain in my eyes, because his expression softened ever so slightly. "Look, Lila, I'm sorry, but this isn't working. We both know it. Maybe it's time we face the fact that we want different things." I wanted to scream, to lash out at him for his callousness, his complete disregard for my feelings. But somehow, I found the strength to hold my tongue. "You're right, Jordan," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "It is time we faced the facts." And with that, I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving him standing there, stunned and alone. As I made my way through the crowd, my mind was racing. Jordan had shown his true colors, and there was no going back. The gloves were off, and I was prepared to fight dirty if that's what it took to bring him down. Little did he know, I had been preparing for this moment all along. And when the time came, I would be ready to deliver the ultimate revenge. After the devastating confrontation at the neighborhood party, I knew I had to take action. Jordan had made it crystal clear that he was done with our marriage, that he was ready to move on and start a new life with his young mistress. But I wasn't about to let him off that easily. Not after everything he had put me through. For days, I seethed in silence, biding my time and waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Jordan, emboldened by his admission, became even more brazen in his infidelity, spending nights away from home and making little effort to hide his liaisons with Kaylee. It was during one of these extended absences that I finally made my move. Using the wealth of evidence I had gathered over the past weeks, the incriminating text messages, the hotel receipts, even grainy photographs of Jordan and Kaylee in compromising positions, I began to piece together a damning case against him. I knew that if I wanted to truly hit him where it hurt, I needed to expose his betrayal in a way that would humiliate him, strip him of his false sense of superiority, and bring him crashing back down to earth. And so I hatched a plan. Late one night, after Jordan had once again failed to come home, I slipped out of the house and made my way to his office. I knew the security codes, the hidden spare key, all the little tricks he thought he had kept so carefully guarded. With trembling hands, I accessed his computer, rifling through files and folders until I found what I was looking for: his personal email and social media accounts, the digital lifeblood that he so carelessly left unprotected. One by one, I began forwarding the incriminating evidence to his closest friends and colleagues, his family members, even his boss. Explicit photos, damning text conversations, receipts for extravagant gifts and hotel stays, nothing was left out. And then, just for good measure, I took to his social media accounts, broadcasting his infidelity for the whole world to see. To my so-called husband Jordan West, I wrote, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a newfound sense of empowerment. "This is the truth you've been so desperate to hide." I hit send, and just like that, the floodgates were open. Jordan's carefully curated facade came crumbling down, his sordid secrets laid bare for all to witness. As I made my way back home, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I knew that the fallout would be nuclear, that Jordan's world was about to implode in spectacular fashion. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally in control of my own destiny. Jordan came stumbling in just before dawn, his shirt rumpled and his hair disheveled. He reeked of alcohol and cheap perfume, the telltale signs of another night spent in Kaylee's arms. He didn't even look at me as he staggered towards the bedroom, lost in his own drunken haze. It wasn't until later that morning, when his phone began to buzz incessantly with a barrage of calls and text messages, that the reality of what I had done began to sink in. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, his voice thick with panic as he scrolled through the damning evidence that I had so carefully curated. I simply shrugged, a small, satisfied smile playing across my lips. "I believe the truth is finally out, Jordan." His eyes widened in horror as the full weight of my actions hit him. In that moment, I could see the arrogance, the smug sense of superiority draining from his face. "You're going to pay for this," he hissed, his hands balling into fists at his sides. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. "No, Jordan," I said, my voice calm and steady. "It's you who's going to pay." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving him to face the consequences of his own actions. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. In the aftermath of my public exposure of Jordan's infidelity, the fallout was swift and brutal. His once thriving career lay in tatters, his reputation irreparably damaged by the sordid details I had so meticulously laid bare. Friends and family members who had once rallied around him now turned their backs, disgusted by his betrayal. Even his own parents, once so proud and doting, could barely bring themselves to look him in the eye. As for me, I found myself riding a wave of vindication, basking in the knowledge that I had finally taken back control of my life, my dignity. Jordan had thought he could discard me like yesterday's trash, but I had proven him wrong in spectacular fashion. Still, there was one final piece of the puzzle that needed to be put into place. A few weeks after the explosive revelation, Jordan and I found ourselves seated in the familiar waiting room of our fertility doctor's office. The air between us was thick with tension, a palpable sense of animosity that had only grown more pronounced in the wake of my retaliation. "Mrs. West, the doctor will see you now," the receptionist called out, her voice laced with a hint of pity that made my skin crawl. Jordan rose to his feet, shooting me a venomous glare as he brushed past me and made his way towards the examination room. I followed closely behind, steeling myself for what was to come. Well, what a pleasure to see you both again," the doctor said, her tone dripping with sarcasm as we took our seats. "I must say, your personal lives have certainly been eventful as of late." Jordan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his jaw clenched tightly. "Can we just cut to the chase, Doc? I'm sure you didn't call us here to gossip." The doctor arched an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by his bravado. "Very well, then. Mr. West, after reviewing your latest test results, I'm afraid I have some rather unfortunate news." She paused, letting the words hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final blow. "It appears that you are suffering from a severe case of male factor infertility. Your sperm count and motility levels are well below the normal range, making it highly unlikely that you would be able to conceive a child naturally." The room seemed to spin around me as the doctor's words sank in. Jordan, the man who had so callously blamed me for our inability to have children, the man who had sought solace in the arms of another woman in pursuit of his dream family. He was the one with the fertility issue all along. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then Jordan let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me," he spat. "After everything, after all the hell you've put me through, you're trying to pull this stunt?" The doctor's expression hardened. "I assure you, Mr. West, this is no stunt. The test results are conclusive and they speak for themselves." Jordan opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off, unable to contain the fury that was bubbling up inside me. "You know, Jordan, I almost feel sorry for you," I said, my voice dripping with contempt. "All this time you've been pointing the finger at me, accusing me of being the reason we couldn't have children. You let your own selfishness and insecurity drive you into the arms of another woman, all because you were too blind to see the truth." His eyes widened as the realization began to sink in, the weight of his own lies and betrayal crashing down upon him. You knew," he stammered, his face pale. "This whole time, you knew." I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. "Of course I knew. Did you really think I was going to let you get away with what you did to me, to us?" The doctor cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable with the unfolding confrontation. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion another time, when emotions have had a chance to settle." But I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. "No, doctor, I think it's time Jordan heard the full truth," I said, turning to face him head-on. "You see, while you were off gallivanting with that little tramp, I was busy collecting evidence. Every sordid detail, every dirty little secret. I have it all." Jordan's face drained of color as the weight of my words sank in. In that moment, he knew he had been beaten at his own game, outmaneuvered and outsmarted by the very woman he had so callously discarded. "And now, thanks to your own carelessness, the whole world knows exactly what kind of man you really are." I continued, relishing in the look of abject horror on his face. A liar, a cheat, a coward who was too weak to face his own shortcomings. Silence hung heavy in the air, punctuated only by the sound of Jordan's ragged breathing. For once in his life he was utterly speechless, stripped of his bravado and left to confront the harsh reality of his own actions. As we left the doctor's office, Jordan trailing behind me like a wounded animal, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. The battle had been long and hard fought, but in the end justice had prevailed, and for the first time in a long time I felt truly free. In the days following the devastating revelation of Jordan's infertility, I found myself riding a wave of vindication and triumph. After months of being gaslit and betrayed, the tables had finally turned. and Jordan was the one left reeling in the aftermath of his own lies and deceit. But my quest for justice was far from over. As word of Jordan's indiscretions spread like wildfire through our small community, I knew I had to strike while the iron was hot. I had already exposed him to our closest friends and colleagues, but there were still those who remained blissfully unaware of the true depths of his betrayal. And so, I hatched a plan, one that would ensure Jordan's humiliation was complete and inescapable. It was a warm summer evening when I invited both of our families over for a casual get-together. Jordan, still reeling from the bombshell I had dropped at the doctor's office, was in no position to protest. One by one, our loved ones trickled in, exchanging pleasantries and sipping on cool drinks as the golden sun dipped below the horizon. Jordan plastered on a forced smile, doing his best to maintain the illusion of normalcy despite the palpable tension in the air. Little did they know, I had already set the stage for the ultimate reveal. As the night wore on and the conversations began to flow more freely, I seized my opportunity. Clearing my throat, I clinked my glass with a fork, commanding the attention of the room. "Friends, family, thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice steady and confident. "I know these past few months have been trying for all of us, but I think it's time we address the elephant in the room." Jordan's eyes went wide, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the arms of his chair. He knew what was coming, but he was powerless to stop it. "You see, for a long time I believed that our struggles to conceive were my fault," I continued, my gaze sweeping across the rapt faces of our guests. "Jordan led me to believe that I was the one with the fertility issues, that my body was letting us down." A collective gasp rippled through the room, and I could see the looks of pity and concern etched on their faces. They had no idea what was about to hit them. "But the truth is, Jordan was the one who was unable to give me the child I so desperately wanted," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "He was the one who was shooting blanks, so to speak." Jordan let out a strangled sound, his face flushing a deep crimson as the gravity of my words sank in. But I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. And instead of being honest with me, instead of facing the truth like a man, he chose to betray me in the worst possible way. I paused for effect, letting the weight of my next words linger in the air. "He cheated on me, with a woman half his age, no less." The room erupted in a cacophony of gasps and murmurs, eyes darting between Jordan and me in disbelief. "That's a lie!" Jordan shouted, shooting to his feet in a rage. "She's twisting the truth, manipulating all of you." But it was too late. With a few deft taps on my phone, I had already set my plan in motion. Suddenly, the room was filled with the unmistakable sounds of Jordan's voice, captured in a damning audio recording I had made during one of our many heated arguments. "You're never going to be able to give me what I really want." His voice crackled through the speakers, laced with venom. "A real family, with kids of my own. Maybe it's time we face the facts. This marriage is over." A deafening silence fell over the room as the recording faded out, punctuated only by the sound of Jordan's ragged breathing. "You see, Jordan thought he could have it all," I said, my voice ringing out in the stillness. "He thought he could discard me like yesterday's trash, all in pursuit of his twisted dream of starting a new family with his mistress." I let the words hang in the air, letting them sink in for all to hear. But what he didn't count on was me fighting back. He never expected me to uncover the truth about his own infertility, his own lies and deceptions. Jordan opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was utterly defeated, laid bare before the very people he had once tried so hard to impress. As our loved ones filed out one by one, casting disgusted glances in Jordan's direction, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. The battle had been hard fought, but in the end, justice had prevailed. And as I watched Jordan slink away, his head hung in shame, I knew that my quest for revenge was finally complete. In the aftermath of my explosive revelation, Jordan's world came crashing down around him. His once promising career was left in tatters, his reputation irreparably tarnished by the sordid details of his infidelity and deception. It didn't take long for the fallout to reach Kaylee, the young mistress who had so brazenly inserted herself into our marriage. As the truth of Jordan's lies and my vengeance came to light, she was quickly cast aside, reduced to a mere footnote in the twisted saga of our unraveling. I'll never forget the look on her face when she realized the depths of Jordan's betrayal, not just towards me, but towards her as well. The tears streamed down her cheeks as she confronted him, demanding answers that he simply couldn't provide. "You told me you were going to leave her," she had sobbed, her voice thick with anger and heartbreak. "You said we were going to have a family together." Jordan for once was rendered speechless. The mask of arrogance and bravado he had worn for so long had finally slipped away, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. "Kaylee, he stammered, his eyes darting around the room in desperation. "It's not what you think." But she wasn't having any of it. With a strength I didn't know she possessed, she gathered her things and stormed out, leaving Jordan to wallow in the wreckage of his own making. As for me, I found myself, slowly but surely, picking up the pieces of my shattered life. The road to healing was a long and arduous one, but with each passing day I could feel the weight of Jordan's betrayal lifting from my shoulders. I threw myself into my work, pouring my heart and soul into teaching and connecting with my students in a way I never had before. Their smiling faces, their boundless energy and enthusiasm became a balm for my wounded spirit. And slowly but surely, I began to rebuild my social circles, surrounding myself with people who truly cared for me, friends and family members who had stood by me through the darkest of times. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the pain and anger threatened to consume me once again. But I was determined to emerge from this experience stronger, more resilient, and more grateful for the people and things that truly mattered. As for Jordan, his fall from grace was as spectacular as it was well-deserved. Without the support of his family and friends, and with his professional reputation in tatters, he found himself adrift, grasping at straws in a desperate attempt to salvage what was left of his life. The last time I saw him was at the courthouse, where we had gathered to finalize the terms of our divorce. He looked like a shell of his former self, his once confident demeanor replaced by a haunted, hollow gaze. "Lila," he said, his voice barely above a whisper as he approached me in the hallway. I don't know what to say." I regarded him coolly, my heart hardened by the months of pain and betrayal he had put me through. "Then don't say anything," I replied, my voice firm and unwavering. "You've said more than enough already." He opened his mouth as if to protest, but the words seemed to die on his lips. Instead, he simply nodded, a flicker of resignation passing across his face, and with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing from my life for good. In the months and years that followed, I found myself gradually letting go of the anger and bitterness that had once consumed me. Jordan's transgressions, while painful, no longer held the same power over me. I had emerged from the ashes of our failed marriage like a phoenix, reborn and reinvigorated, ready to embrace the next chapter of my life with open arms. And as I looked towards the future, one thing was certain. I would never again allow myself to be defined by the actions of others, nor would I ever let someone like Jordan take away my sense of self-worth and dignity. I was my own woman, strong and resilient, and nothing, not even the cruelest of betrayals, could ever change that. My world came crashing down that fateful evening. The words I overheard pierced my soul like daggers, shattering the illusion I had clung to for nearly 2 decades. As I stood frozen in the hallway, the muffled voices of my husband, Carl, and my stepson, Dean, echoed with treacherous clarity. "Once Dean graduates, we can finally cut her loose." Carl's callous whisper sent chills down my spine. "She's served her purpose and we won't need her or her money anymore." Dean's nonchalant reply crushed what little hope remained in my heart. "Sounds good, Dad. It's been a long con, but we played her perfectly." Their words hung heavy in the air, a cruel reminder of the deceit that had shrouded my life for years. I stumbled back, my legs trembling, as the realization hit me like a freight train. Carl and Dean had been using me all this time, exploiting my love and resources for their own selfish gains. Memories flooded my mind. Moments I had once cherished, now tainted by the bitter truth. The first time Carl had swept me off my feet, with his charming smile and promises of a happy family life after my divorce. The way he had introduced me to his young son, Dean, and how I had embraced the role of a loving stepmother, determined to give them both the stability they craved. Little did I know, Their affection was a mere facade, a carefully crafted ruse to lure me into their web of lies. As the years passed, the cracks in our relationship became more apparent, but I had chosen to ignore them, blinded by an unwavering commitment to our supposed family. Carl's subtle manipulations, his constant need for financial support under the guise of building a better future for us all, Dean's growing indifference towards me, the once affectionate child, now distant and aloof. The signs had been there all along, but I had been too naive, too trusting, to see the truth. Tears streamed down my face as I retreated to the sanctity of my bedroom, my sanctuary now tainted by the betrayal that lingered in every corner. I cried not only for the life I had lost, but also for the person I had become, a pawn in their twisted game, a means to an end. As the shock subsided, a newfound determination took root within me. I would not be a victim any longer. It was time to take back control, to reclaim the dignity they had stolen from me. With quiet resolve, I began to formulate a plan, a blueprint for my liberation from the shadows of deceit that had encompassed my existence for far too long. As I lay awake that night, my mind drifted back to the fateful day when I first met Carl. It was a time of vulnerability, a period of transition after my divorce from my first husband, Jack. I was emotionally drained, struggling to find my footing in the aftermath of a broken marriage. Carl had appeared like a beacon of hope, a charming and supportive figure who promised to mend my shattered heart. With his warm smile and reassuring words, he swept me off my feet, offering the stability and companionship I so desperately craved. "Let me take care of you, Marla," he had whispered, his voice like velvet. "You've been through so much. It's time for you to be cherished the way you deserve." Blinded by his charisma and my own vulnerability, I had fallen for his act, hook, line, and sinker. Little did I know that beneath the facade of kindness lurked a master manipulator, a man driven by greed and selfishness. When Carl introduced me to his son Dean, a shy and seemingly well-behaved child, I embraced the role of a stepmother wholeheartedly. I poured my heart and soul into nurturing this broken family, determined to create a loving and supportive environment for us all. "I promise to be the best mom you could ever hope for," I had told the wide-eyed boy, pulling him into a warm embrace. Dean had nodded silently, his small arms wrapping around me with a hesitant affection that gradually grew stronger over time. Or so I had thought. In hindsight, the signs of their true intentions had been there from the beginning, but I had been too blinded by love and hope to see them. Carl's constant need for financial assistance, his insistence that I quit my job to focus on being a homemaker, it had all been part of his grand scheme. "A happy family needs a strong foundation," he would say, his eyes gleaming with what I now recognize as pure manipulation. "Let me handle the finances, darling. Your role is to create a loving home for us." And like a fool, I had fallen for his lies, sacrificing my career and independence to cater to his every whim. As for Dean, his transformation from a seemingly affectionate child to a cold and indifferent young man had been gradual yet unmistakable. The once loving hugs and eager conversations had given way to curt nods and disinterested grunts. "Leave him be," Carl would say whenever I expressed concern. "He's just going through a phase. Boys will be boys." But the truth was far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. Dean's detachment was not a phase, but a calculated move, a part of the grand deception orchestrated by him and his father. As the memories flooded back, I felt a surge of rage coursing through my veins. How could I have been so blind, so trusting? These men, the very people I'd poured my heart and soul into, had been using me all along, exploiting my love and resources for their own selfish gains. Tears of anger and betrayal stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "No more tears," I vowed. From this moment on, I would fight back, reclaiming the life and dignity they had stolen from me. The scales had fallen from my eyes, and I would not rest until justice was served. In the days that followed my devastating discovery, I found myself hyper-aware of every interaction, every word uttered by Carl and Dean. What had once been mere background noise now carried weight, each statement and action a potential clue to the depths of their betrayal. It was during one of our family dinners that the first crack in their facade appeared. As we sat around the table, Carl cleared his throat, his expression one of feigned concern. "Marla, dear, "I've been meaning to discuss something with you," he began, his tone sickly sweet. "It seems our finances have taken a bit of a hit lately, and I may need to dip into your savings to keep us afloat." My heart sank at his words, but I maintained a calm exterior, determined not to reveal the tempest raging within me. "Of course, honey," I lied, forcing a smile. "Whatever you need to do to keep our family secure." Dean remained silent throughout the exchange, his eyes downcast as he shoveled food into his mouth, seemingly disinterested in the conversation. Little did they know that I had already begun my own investigation, meticulously combing through our financial records and uncovering a trail of deception that stretched back years. Carl's investments and business ventures, all smoke and mirrors, designed to siphon my hard-earned savings into his own pockets. As the days progressed, the instances of their disregard for my well-being became more blatant. Carl would frequently dismiss my concerns with a wave of his hand, while Dean would openly ignore my attempts at conversation, preferring to bury his nose in his phone or disappear into his room for hours on end. "He's just going through a phase," Carl would repeat, his worn-out excuse falling flat against the weight of my newfound skepticism. It was during one of these tense silences that I stumbled upon the final piece of the puzzle, a stack of legal documents, buried beneath a pile of Carl's papers. My heart raced as I pored over the pages, my suspicions confirmed in black and white. Carl had been meticulously manipulating the paperwork, attributing my assets and investments to his name, effectively stripping me of my financial independence and autonomy. It was a calculated move, a slow and steady erosion of my resources, all in preparation for the day when he and Dean would finally cut me loose, as they had so callously put it. In that moment, any lingering doubt I harbored evaporated. These men, the very people I had loved and trusted, were nothing more than parasites, feeding off my generosity and love for their own selfish gains. As I clutched the damning documents in my trembling hands, a newfound resolve took root within me. I would no longer be a victim, cowering in the shadows of their deceit. It was time to take action, to reclaim what was rightfully mine, and exact a fitting retribution upon those who had so cruelly betrayed me. With steely determination, I began to document every encounter, every conversation, and every financial transaction. I would build an ironclad case against them, leaving no room for doubt or denial. And when the time was right, I would strike, unleashing the full force of my fury upon these traitors who had dared to call themselves family. With each passing day, the emotional and financial strain of living under the same roof as my deceivers grew more oppressive. Carl's demands for money became increasingly frequent, his excuses more flimsy and transparent. "Business has been slow, sweetheart," he would say, his hand resting on my shoulder in a mockery of affection. "I need to dip into our savings again to keep things afloat." I would nod silently, my jaw clenched, as I watched him siphon away my hard-earned nest egg, feeding his insatiable greed with callous disregard for the future I had envisioned for myself. Dean, for his part, remained aloof and indifferent, his nose perpetually buried in his phone or his attention focused on his studies. It was as if he had already written me off, discarding me like a used toy in anticipation of the day when I would no longer serve his purposes. It was during one of these tense encounters that I made a decision that would set in motion a chain of events from which there would be no turning back. Quietly, without arousing suspicion, I sought out legal counsel, determined to understand my rights and options. The lawyer's name was Jacob, a sharp-eyed man in his late 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor that instantly put me at ease. As I poured out the sordid details of my situation, his expression remained impassive, though a flicker of sympathy crossed his features. "What you're describing is financial abuse, plain and simple," he said, his voice low and grave. "But you have options, Mrs. Carter. We can help you reclaim what's rightfully yours and protect your interests moving forward." With Jacob's guidance, I began to meticulously document every encounter, every conversation, and every financial transaction. I installed hidden cameras and voice recorders, capturing the evidence I needed to build an ironclad case against Carl and Dean. The process was emotionally draining, but I persevered, fueled by a burning desire for justice and retribution. I would no longer be the meek, trusting fool they had taken me for. I was a woman reborn, a phoenix rising from the ashes of their deceit. As the weeks ticked by, the tension in our household became palpable, a suffocating miasma of distrust and resentment. Carl grew increasingly agitated by my newfound distance, his once smooth facade cracking under the weight of his own paranoia. "What's gotten into you lately, Marla?" he would demand, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You've been acting strange, distant." I would simply shrug, offering a placating smile that concealed the fury simmering beneath the surface. "Just tired, that's all," I would lie, relishing the flicker of doubt that crossed his features. Dean, too, began to take notice of the shift in our dynamic, his brow furrowed in confusion as he observed the subtle power struggle unfolding before his eyes. Little did they know that with each passing day, I was inching closer to my goal. The day when I would finally break free from their toxic grip and reclaim the life they had so callously stolen from me. As the countdown to Dean's college graduation loomed ever closer, I knew my window of opportunity was rapidly shrinking. It was time to finalize my exit strategy, to gather my resources and prepare for the final act of this sordid drama. And when the curtain fell, there would be no encore, only the sweet, sweet taste of justice and retribution. In the days leading up to Dean's college graduation, the atmosphere in our home grew increasingly tense, a suffocating cloud of unspoken resentment and suspicion hanging over our every interaction. Carl's demands for money became more insistent, his excuses more flimsy and transparent with each passing day. "Business is really struggling, dear," he would say, his hand resting on my shoulder in a mockery of affection. "I need to dip into our savings again to keep things afloat." I would nod silently, my jaw clenched as I watched him siphon away my hard-earned nest egg, feeding his insatiable greed with callous disregard for the future I had once envisioned for myself. Dean, for his part, remained aloof and indifferent, his nose perpetually buried in his phone or his attention focused on his studies. It was as if he had already written me off, discarding me like a used toy in anticipation of the day when I would no longer serve his purposes. Yet, beneath my calm exterior, a storm was brewing, a tempest of rage and determination that had been steadily building since the moment I discovered their treachery. With each passing day, I grew more resolute, more focused on the endgame that had consumed my every waking thought. I maintained a facade of ignorance, attending to the daily routines and chores that had once defined my existence, all the while secretly finalizing my escape plan. Piece by piece, I gathered the evidence, the resources, and the fortitude I would need to break free from their toxic grip once and for all. As the date of Dean's graduation drew ever closer, I could sense Carl's excitement growing, his eyes alight with a gleam of smug satisfaction that made my skin crawl. In his mind, the finish line was in sight, the day when he and his son would finally be rid of me, free to bask in the spoils of their deceit without the burden of my presence. Little did he know that I had been one step ahead all along, carefully laying the groundwork for his downfall with each calculated move. The night before the graduation ceremony, I lay awake in bed, my mind racing with the weight of the decisions I had made. There would be no turning back from this point, no chance for reconciliation or forgiveness. I was about to burn bridges that had once been the foundation of my life, severing ties with the men who had so callously betrayed me. Yet as I gazed at Carl's sleeping form beside me, I felt no regret, no pangs of sentimentality or nostalgia. The man I had once loved was long gone, replaced by a hollow shell of greed and manipulation that had stripped me of my dignity and self-worth. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains, I rose from the bed, my movements silent and purposeful. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for, the culmination of months of careful planning and unwavering determination. With a steely resolve, I gathered my belongings, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. This was not a retreat, but a calculated strike, a surgical strike that would leave my tormentors reeling in the wake of my departure. As I stepped out into the cool morning air, a sense of liberation washed over me, a weight lifting from my shoulders with each stride. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt truly alive, unburdened by the shackles of deceit that had bound me for far too long. And as the sun rose over the horizon, casting its warm glow upon my newfound freedom, I couldn't help but smile. The game was over, and I had won. The day of Dean's college graduation dawned bright and sunny, a cruel mockery of the storm that was about to be unleashed upon my unsuspecting tormentors. As I settled into my seat in the auditorium, surrounded by beaming families and proud graduates, a sense of calm washed over me. This was it, the moment I had been meticulously planning for, the catalyst that would set my grand scheme into motion. Carl and Dean were oblivious to my presence, their attention focused solely on the stage as the ceremony commenced. I watched them from afar, taking note of their smug expressions, their casual disregard for the woman they had so callously used and discarded. As the graduates' names were called one by one, a hush fell over the crowd, punctuated by thunderous applause and cheers. When Dean's name was announced, Carl leapt to his feet, whooping and hollering like a man possessed, his arms raised in triumph. It was a sickening display, one that only served to further solidify my resolve. These men, these parasites who had leached off my love and resources for years, would soon learn the true meaning of consequence. As the ceremony drew to a close and the graduates filed out, I remained rooted in my seat, my heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and adrenaline. Carl and Dean made their way towards the exit, deep in conversation, their faces alight with smug satisfaction. It was then that I made my move. Rising from my seat, I approached them with a purposeful stride, my expression one of steely determination. Carl's brow furrowed as he caught sight of me, his mouth opening to speak, but I cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Don't bother," I said, my voice low and unwavering. "I know everything, Carl. Every lie, every manipulation, every scheme you and your son have concocted to bleed me dry." Dean's face paled, his eyes widening in shock as the realization of my words sank in. Carl, ever the practiced liar, attempted to brush off my accusation with a dismissive chuckle. "Marla, darling, what on earth are you talking about?" he began, but I silenced him with a withering glare. "Save it," I spat, reaching into my purse and retrieving a thick envelope. "I have all the evidence right here. Bank statements, audio recordings, legal documents. You've been playing me for a fool for years, and it ends today." Carl's face contorted with rage, his mask of affability crumbling as he lunged towards me. "You stupid bye. I wouldn't finish that sentence if I were you," a deep voice rumbled from behind me. I turned to see Jacob, my lawyer, flank two burly security guards. Their presence alone was enough to give Carl pause, his bluster deflating as he realized the precarious position he now found himself in. "Mrs. Carter has made her decision," Jacob continued, his tone brooking no argument. "She's separating her assets from yours, effective immediately. Any attempt to contest it or retaliate will be met with swift legal action." Carl opened his mouth to protest, but the words died on his lips as he took in the severity of the situation. He was trapped, ensnared in the very web of deceit he had so carefully woven over the years. With a resigned slump of his shoulders, he turned to me, his eyes burning with impotent fury. "You'll regret this, Marla," he hissed. "Mark my words." But his threats fell on deaf ears. I had already won, and there was nothing he could do to stop the wheels of justice from turning. As I walked away, leaving Carl and Dean to stew in the wreckage of their own making, a sense of liberation washed over me. The shackles of their deceit had finally been broken, and I was free to reclaim the life and dignity they had stolen from me. And as the warm sun caressed my face, I couldn't help but smile. Justice, at long last, had been served. The days following my public confrontation with Carl and Dean were a whirlwind of activity. No sooner had I walked away from the graduation ceremony, leaving them sputtering in impotent rage, than the true weight of my actions began to sink in. I had burned the bridge, torched the very foundation upon which my life had been built for nearly 2 decades. There was no going back, no chance for reconciliation or forgiveness. I had exposed the ugly truth of their betrayal, and in doing so, set into motion a chain of events that would forever alter the course of our lives. It was late that evening when my phone rang, the familiar number flashing on the screen like a harbinger of the storm to come. With a steadying breath, I answered, steeling myself for the onslaught. "You've made a grave mistake, Marla." Carl's voice crackled through the receiver, laced with a barely contained fury that sent a shiver down my spine. Did you really think you could just walk away like that, after everything we've built together? I scoffed at his words, my resolve unwavering. We built nothing, Carl. It was all a lie, a carefully constructed facade designed to bleed me dry. But the game is over now, and I've won. His response was a guttural growl, a primal sound that betrayed the depths of his rage. You think you've won? You stupid, naive woman, you have no idea what you've done, what you've cost me and my son. I could picture him pacing like a caged animal, his knuckles white with the strain of gripping the phone. I'll make you pay for this, Marla. Mark my words, I'll make your life a living hell. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, the sound foreign and unfamiliar even to my own ears. Is that a threat, Carl? Because if it is, you'd better be prepared to back it up. I have a team of lawyers and enough evidence to bury you and your precious son for what you've done. There was a moment of silence, a pregnant pause that hung heavy between us. Then, a low chuckle, dripping with disdain. You really think you've got it all figured out, don't you? Well, let me tell you something, sweetheart. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. You may have won the battle, but the war has just begun. With that ominous declaration, the line went dead, leaving me to ponder the weight of his words. Was it merely a hollow threat, the desperate bluster of a man backed into a corner? Or was there truth to his vow, a promise of retaliation that would haunt my every step? In that moment, I realized that my journey was far from over. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, with battles to be fought and demons to be faced. But I was no longer the meek, trusting woman who had been so easily manipulated and exploited. I was a warrior, forged in the fires of betrayal and tempered by the hard-won lessons of life. And as I set about the task of rebuilding my life from the ashes of their lies, I vowed to face whatever came my way with the same steely resolve that had carried me this far. The first order of business was to sever the remaining ties that bound me to Carl and Dean, to excise their toxic influence from every corner of my existence. I reached out to mutual friends and family members, laying bare the sordid truth of their schemes and the depths of their deceit. The reactions were a mixed bag. Some expressed shock and disbelief, while others admitted to harboring suspicions all along. But one thing was clear. The facade had been shattered, and Carl and Dean were left exposed, their true natures laid bare for all to see. As word spread like wildfire through our once tightly knit social circle, the backlash was swift and severe. Friendships were severed, invitations rescinded, and the once respected father and son found themselves ostracized, cast out from the very community they had sought to exploit. It was a harsh punishment, but one that paled in comparison to the pain and suffering they had inflicted upon me. As I watched their world crumble around them, a sense of vindication washed over me, a heady cocktail of relief and triumph that left me feeling both empowered and humbled. For in the end, justice had been served, not by my hand alone, but by the collective weight of truth and consequence. And as I turned my gaze towards the future, a future free from the shackles of their deceit, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them head-on, unbowed and unbroken. The months that followed my escape from Carl and Dean's clutches were a whirlwind of change and self-discovery. With their toxic influence finally excised from my life, I found myself embarking on a journey of rebirth, shedding the shackles of my past like a snake shedding its skin. I left the city that had been the backdrop to my years of suffering, trading the familiar streets and haunted memories for the promise of a fresh start elsewhere. In a new town, with new surroundings, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying until it was gone. Gone were the constant reminders of my betrayal, the whispers and sidelong glances that had dogged my every step in the aftermath of my confrontation with Carl and Dean. Here, in this unfamiliar place, I was free to reinvent myself, to reclaim the person I had been before their deceit had tainted my very existence. And so, I threw myself headlong into the task of rebuilding, pouring my energy and focus into rediscovering the passions and ambitions that had once defined me. I returned to the workforce, taking a job that reignited the flames of my long-dormant career aspirations. With each day, I felt myself growing stronger, more confident, more alive. It was during this period of rebirth that the news reached me, a whisper on the grapevine that quickly grew into a roar of schadenfreude. Dean, the once promising young man whose future had been the centerpiece of his father's machinations, had dropped out of college. The reasons were murky, but the underlying truth was clear. Without my financial support, without the steady stream of resources they had so callously exploited, their grand plans had crumbled to dust. The very future they had sought to secure through deceit and manipulation had slipped through their grasping fingers, undone by their own greed and hubris. As for Carl, the once charming manipulator found himself a pariah, shunned and ostracized by the very social circles he had once moved through with such ease. His attempts to rebuild his reputation and regain his footing were met with scorn and derision, a testament to the depths of his betrayal and the enduring power of truth. In the wake of their downfall, a part of me felt a twinge of satisfaction, a vindictive pleasure in witnessing the karmic consequences of their actions. But that fleeting sense of triumph was quickly overshadowed by a deeper, more profound realization. I was free. Free from the shackles of their deceit, free from the weight of their lies, and free to chart my own course, unencumbered by the baggage of the past. It was a heady, intoxicating feeling, one that filled me with a sense of possibility and potential that I had long since forgotten. As the months turned into years, the details of my ordeal began to fade, the sharp edges of pain and betrayal softening into the hazy recollections of a life left behind. Carl, once the center of my universe, became little more than a footnote in the grand narrative of my existence, a cautionary tale, a reminder of the depths to which the human heart can sink when consumed by greed and selfishness. And yet, even as the scars of his treachery faded, I found myself forever changed by the experience, tempered by the fires of adversity and forged into a stronger, more resilient version of myself. The woman who had once been so easily manipulated and exploited was gone, replaced by a warrior, a survivor who had stared into the abyss of deceit and emerged victorious, her dignity and self-worth intact. As I looked back on the winding path that had brought me to this point, I felt a swell of pride and gratitude, pride in my own strength and resilience, and gratitude for the hard-won lessons that had shaped me into the woman I had become. And as I turned my gaze towards the future, a future brimming with possibility and promise, I couldn't help but smile. For in the end, it was not Carl or Dean who had emerged triumphant, but me, the woman who had dared to stand up to their lies and reclaim her life, one courageous step at a time. I stared at Kyle in disbelief, his words cutting deeper than any knife. "A barren bitch?" I repeated, the venom dripping from his drunken slur. The wedding reception around us fell silent, all eyes turning towards the commotion. "You heard me," Kyle sneered, his face flushed from too much whiskey. "When are you going to accept that you're defective? We should have never gotten married." White-hot shame burned my cheeks as I looked around at my family's horrified expressions. My sister Amy's hand flew to her mouth, her beautiful wedding day now marred by her new brother-in-law's cruelty. In that moment, I knew my marriage was over. How could I ever forgive such a humiliating insult, hurled at me simply for being unable to conceive? The one thing I'd been upfront about from the start, yet Kyle had promised to accept. I thought back to those early days when we first met. I was his realtor during his bitter divorce. Despite the awkward circumstances, an unexpected spark had formed between us. Kyle love-bombed me with reassurances that my infertility didn't matter, that he just wanted to build a life with me. Looking into his glazed, hateful eyes now, I barely recognized that same man. "I'm leaving," I declared, fighting back tears. I refused to allow Kyle to see me crumble. Not after he'd so callously disrespected me in front of everyone. "Yeah, get out of my face," he growled, swaying on unsteady feet. "Useless." I stormed out with as much dignity as I could muster, my heart shattering into pieces. How could someone I loved turn so monstrous over the very issue he claimed to accept? In the parking lot, I collapsed against my car, sobs racking my body. Distantly, I heard Amy calling my name, but I couldn't bear to face her, or anyone right now. I just wanted to go home, to the house I'd worked so hard to purchase through a successful real estate career. A career that had always come first for me, until my biological clock started ticking and I realized how much I longed for a child of my own. A dream that now seemed permanently out of reach because of my so-called husband's cruelty. Anger began to eclipse my sadness as I thought about all the times I'd broached trying IVF, only for Kyle to shut me down or make excuses for not getting tested himself. Was this his plan all along? To string me along until he could publicly humiliate me over my infertility? Well, if that was the game he wanted to play, I vowed in that moment to make him pay dearly. I would fight for everything in the divorce, the house, the assets, the whole 9 yards. And I wouldn't stop there. Kyle had awoken a vengeful fire within me that would burn every last part of his miserable existence to the ground. Whatever it took, I would make him suffer as he'd made me suffer tonight. He wanted to see a real bitch. He was about to meet one, and by the time I was done with him, he'd have a new word for what I was: unstoppable. I couldn't get the image of Kyle's cruel sneer out of my mind as I sat alone in the dimly lit bar nursing a glass of Cabernet. Normally, I preferred to drink at home, but tonight I needed the ambiance of somewhere public to take my mind off the events at Amy's wedding reception. "Can I get you another?" The bartender nodded towards my empty glass, but I shook my head. One was enough for me to take the edge off without going overboard. As I sipped the last few ruby drops, my mind drifted back to those first giddy months when Kyle and I began dating. He'd been so attentive, so understanding about my infertility struggles. Looking back, I realized he'd simply been mirroring me, telling me exactly what I wanted to hear. We'd met during one of the lowest points of my life, Kyle hiring me as his realtor to sell the house he'd shared with his ex-wife. Despite the somber circumstances, there was an undeniable spark between us from that first open house walkthrough. "I have to admit, you're making this painful process a lot more bearable," Kyle had said with a warm smile, his hazel eyes crinkling at the corners. "You've got a great bedside manner for an agent." I'd felt an unexpected flutter in my chest at the compliment. "Well, I do try to make my clients as comfortable as possible during emotional transitions like this." "Oh, I'm definitely comfortable around you," he'd said with a wink, leaving me flustered but intrigued. Over the next few weeks, Kyle's harmless flirtations escalated until he finally asked me out for drinks. I'll admit I was hesitant at first. Dating a client seemed like such a conflict of interest, but Kyle a charming, persistent man, and eventually I gave in to his pursuit. "I want you to know, I'm okay with the fact that you can't have kids," he'd said on one of our first dates, catching me off guard with his forwardness. "My ex put me through hell trying to get pregnant for years. I'm kind of relieved not to go through that again." I'd tensed up, prepared for the usual rejection that came whenever I disclosed my infertility to potential partners. But Kyle simply reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Hey, I mean it. That's not a deal breaker for me at all. You're smart, successful, beautiful. What more could a guy want?" His easy acceptance was like a balm to the wound I'd carried for so long. Here was a man who didn't care about my inability to bear children, who seemed to genuinely want me for me. How naive I was back then. "Another glass of wine?" The bartender's voice pulled me from my reverie. I looked up, blinking against the harsh lights. No, I'm good. Just get me my tab, please." I needed to sober up and clear my head. As I settled the bill and headed for the door, anger began to simmer within me once again. How dare Kyle take the one part of me I'd always been upfront about and use it as a weapon against me? After he'd sworn up and down it didn't matter? Well, if he thought he'd be rid of me so easily, he had another thing coming. I was done being the sad, yearning woman he could trample over. From here on out, Kyle was going to learn exactly what a real bitch looked like. And by the time I was through with him, he'd be begging for mercy. I took a deep, steadying breath before ringing the doorbell of my own home. It had been 3 days since Kyle's atrocious outburst at Amy's wedding, and I'd temporarily been staying at a hotel to clear my head. But it was time to rip off the Band-Aid. The door swung open, and Kyle stood there, his expression unreadable. He didn't appear hungover or remorseful in the slightest. "We need to talk," I said firmly, pushing past him into the hallway. He silently followed me into the living room, taking a seat in the recliner as I perched on the edge of the sofa. "I've been thinking a lot about our situation," I began carefully. "What you said at the wedding was—" I had to pause to collect myself. "It was unforgivable, Kyle. You humiliated me in front of my entire family." He opened his mouth, presumably to offer some half-baked apology, but I held up a hand to stop him. Don't. Just don't. I don't want to hear excuses or hollow apologies. What's done is done, and I can't look past that kind of cruelty. Kyle's jaw tightened mulishly. So what? You're just going to give up on us? On having a family? I laughed bitterly at that. You're the one who gave up on that dream long ago. When was the last time you even entertained the idea of fertility treatments, of doing whatever it takes to make a child happen for us? Silence answered me, just as I expected. Kyle had been stonewalling my attempts to pursue IVF or even get basic testing done. That's what I thought, I said, more to myself than him. The truth is, you've checked out of this marriage for a while. You just didn't have the backbone to end it yourself. That's not true, Kyle snapped, finally showing a flicker of emotion. Jesus, Vivian, you know how much I want a kid of my own. But conventional routes haven't worked, and I'm not interested in exploring other options right now. I stared at him in disbelief. Are you serious right now? You're the one putting roadblocks in our way at every turn. Anytime I bring up IVF, you shut me down immediately. Those treatments are expensive and intrusive, he countered. I'm not comfortable subjecting you to that until we've exhausted all other possibilities. Like what? I threw up my hands in exasperation. We're not getting any younger, Kyle. And you refuse to even get your fertility tested to see if the issue is on your end. An ugly look crossed his face then. Oh, so now you're implying I'm the problem? That's real rich coming from Miss Barren bitch. White-hot rage lanced through me at his vicious reuse of that degrading insult. Before I could stop myself, I grabbed the heavy crystal vase from the end table and whipped it directly at his head. Kyle ducked just in time, the vase shattering against the wall in an explosion of glass and water. We both froze, chests heaving, staring at each other in shock. In that moment, I knew there was no going back for us. Whatever tender feelings I'd once harbored for this man were gone, eroded by a callousness I could no longer excuse or endure. Get out, I said in a low, trembling voice. Get your shit and get out of my house. For once, Kyle seemed to understand I was deadly serious. He stood slowly, holding my gaze with an unreadable look. Then, without another word, he turned and left the room to pack his things. 3 weeks had passed since I kicked Kyle out, and I was just starting to feel like I could breathe again. The divorce proceedings were underway, and with each legal maneuver, I felt layers of his toxic presence being stripped away from my life. I should have known it wouldn't last. The incessant ringing of my cell dragged me from a restful slumber. Frowning, I squinted at the caller ID. It was Kyle. Again. I let it go to voicemail like I had been doing for days. Wrapping my robe around me, I shuffled into the kitchen to brew some coffee, trying to shake off the grogginess. My phone began ringing once more from the other room. For fuck's sake, I muttered, abandoning my pursuit of caffeine to snatch up the device. What? Don't hang up, Kyle's voice came through the line, thick and slurred. Of course he was drunk. We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you, I replied coldly. This divorce is happening whether you like it or not. Vivian, baby, listen to me. He was beginning to ramble, his words running together unintelligibly. I pinched the bridge of my nose in frustration. Kyle, you're wasted. I'm not doing this right now. I met someone, he suddenly blurted out. I stilled, ice flooding my veins. What did you say? There's this girl at work. Kyle barreled on, uncaring of the fresh hell he was putting me through. Her name's Jade, pretty little thing, you know, with workin' ovaries and all that. My breath came in harsh pants as I digested the full extent of his betrayal. He'd been cheating on me this whole time, with some fertile young thing who could give him what I couldn't. You son of a bitch, I hissed through gritted teeth. How long has this been going on? Does it matter? Kyle slurred carelessly. Face it, Viv, we were dead in the water from the start. You got a defective body, and I got needs, you know? I was trembling with rage, my knuckles white from gripping the phone so tightly. How dare he? How dare he try to blame this on me after he'd sworn my infertility was no issue? I want you to listen to me very carefully, Kyle, I said in a low, dangerous tone. You're going to sober up, and you're going to gather whatever pathetic belongings you have left at this house, because I swear to God, if you show up here again uninvited, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. There was a pause, then Kyle snorted derisively. You always did have a flair for the dramatic, babe. That's what I'll miss most about you. I disconnected the call without another word, my entire body shaking with hatred and disgust. The man I had loved, the man I nearly sacrificed my career for to start a family with, had revealed himself as an abusive, unfaithful monster. Fine. If this was how he wanted to play it, I would oblige him. No more Mrs. Nice Guy. It was time to fight fire with hellfire. I would take him for every last penny and asset in this divorce, and that would just be the start. By the time I was through with Kyle, he would have absolutely nothing left. No money, no reputation, no future. Just a shell of the man who thought he could walk all over me and get away with it. He wanted to see a real bitch? Oh, he was going to get one. And this time she would be utterly unstoppable. The sharp clack of my heels against the marble floor echoed through the cavernous courthouse lobby as I strode towards the designated courtroom. My stomach was a roiling knot of nerves and fury, but I refused to let it show on my face. I was all business today. Kyle was already seated at the defendant's table when I arrived, slouched in his chair with a sullen expression. His lawyer leaned over to murmur something in his ear, but he just shrugged listlessly. Typical Kyle, never taking anything seriously until it was too late. Miss Archer, my attorney Jessica, greeted me with a warm smile as I took my place. Are you ready for this? I gave her a curt nod, my jaw clenched tightly. More than ready. I'd been counting down the days until I could finally face Kyle in this arena and make him pay for his deplorable actions. The judge entered and called the court into session. I tuned out the usual procedural blah blah, keeping my eyes trained on Kyle with laser focus. He refused to meet my gaze, however, fixing his stare somewhere in the middle distance. Finally, it was time for opening statements. Kyle's lawyer, some smug jackass in an expensive suit, stood and launched into a long-winded diatribe about how his client was just a poor, downtrodden man being persecuted by his wife's inability to have children. How Kyle had stuck by me for years, waiting patiently to start a family, only to have his dreams crushed by my medical condition. I had to grip the table to keep from erupting at the blatant character assassination. How dare they try to paint Kyle as some sort of long-suffering victim, after the unspeakable way he disrespected and betrayed me? When it was Jessica's turn, she calmly recounted the real facts. How Kyle had willfully cheated on and abandoned me after I'd been upfront about my infertility from the start. How he'd grown abusive and mocked my condition, violating the prenuptial agreement we'd signed about dealing with this issue together through IVF or other treatments. Mr. Walker is an adulterer and a liar who has caused severe emotional trauma to my client, Jessica stated, her voice like steel. We will be seeking full entitlement of assets as well as spousal support on Miss Archer's behalf. She has more than upheld her end of their marital contract. I could feel Kyle's hateful glare burning a hole in the side of my head, but I didn't dare look his way. I was too busy fighting back a triumphant smirk. This was merely the opening salvo. By the time these proceedings were over, Kyle would be left with nothing but the clothes on his back. Every last penny, property, and asset would be striped from him in recompense for his cruelty. And even that wouldn't be enough for me. The legal realm was just the start. I would make it my life's mission to utterly decimate Kyle's existence down to the bone. He thought he'd been humiliated at Amy's wedding? He hadn't seen anything yet. As the judge droned on, laying out the schedule for evidence presentation and witness testimony, I allowed myself a sidelong glance at my soon-to-be ex-husband. Our eyes met, and I made sure he could see the cold, brutal determination in my gaze, a silent promise of the suffering to come. Kyle's sneer faltered for just a moment before he looked away. Good. He was finally starting to understand that he'd awoken a vengeful beast that would never rest until he paid the ultimate price. And I always collected what was owed to me. The rhythmic tapping of my manicured nails against the sleek desktop provided a steady metronome as I pored over the documents laid out before me. Financial records, property deeds, business prospectus files, I had dug up every last scrap of Kyle's personal and professional life like a bloodhound. My eyes narrowed as I studied the latest incriminating paper trail. So this was how Kyle had been funding his tawdry little affair with that perky blonde Jade, siphoning money from his sham of a business into an offshore account, thinking he could hide his indiscretions from me. Fool. There wasn't a single underhanded deal or shady transaction that could escape my scrutiny. Not when I had the most powerful tools in my arsenal, an encyclopedic knowledge of real estate loopholes, and my unshakable thirst for vengeance. The divorce proceedings had been a mere opening salvo. Kyle had been so smug, so sure he could bully and manipulate his way into keeping the bulk of our assets like he had in his previous marriage. But I'd beaten him at his own game, stripping away everything he tried to protect until he was left with next to nothing. Yet that still wasn't enough for me, not by a long shot. No, I needed to ghost Earth on his entire miserable existence, destroy every last thread of his finances, his reputation, his future prospects, until he was left as a sniveling, impoverished husk. Only then would I finally be able to breathe freely again. A sudden knock at the door broke my concentration. "Come in, come in." I called out crisply. Jessica strode into the room, her sharp gaze scanning the paper trail laid out before me. "Working late again, I see," she remarked with a hint of admiration. "You really are relentless when you set your mind to something, Vivian." "You know me," I replied with a thin smile. "I never leave a job half-finished." "Well, your dedication is certainly paying off." Jessica set a glossy folder on the desk between us. "I have the latest updates on our extracurricular activities regarding Mr. Walker." I snatched up the folder eagerly, flipping it open to examine the contents. A feral grin slowly spread across my face as I took in the damning evidence. Phone records, financial statements, photos. All the proof I needed to bring the next phase of my revenge scheme crashing down on Kyle's head. "This is perfect," I purred, looking up at Jessica with undisguised glee. "He'll never see this coming." "I must admit, I had my doubts when you first proposed this undertaking," Jessica said carefully. "It's not exactly something they cover in law school ethics courses. But you're a professional who understands that ethical rules are more like guidelines," I countered with a wink, "especially when the ends justify the means." Jessica's cool demeanor cracked slightly as she let out a low chuckle. "Well, when you put it that way, let's just say I've enjoyed being on the winning team for once." "Don't worry. You'll be compensated handsomely for all your efforts," I assured her, already turning my mind to the delicious ways I could dismantle Kyle's world using this new intel. "Thanks to you, that bastard is going to wish he'd never been born by the time I'm through with him." "I have no doubt," Jessica murmured, almost sounding impressed against her will. She drew her blazer a little tighter. "Well then, I'll leave you to it. Just let me know if there's anything else I can do to assist in your endeavors." I was already only half listening, my laser focus burning through the documents before me as I began formulating my intricate new game plan. Kyle thought he could slither away from our marriage and build a new life on top of the ashes like some soulless phoenix. He was about to learn just how foolish that assumption was. I would make certain he had no life to go back to at all. Not when I was through burying every last remnant of his very existence. Let the real games begin. The harsh buzzing of the intercom dragged me from my slumber. Bleary-eyed, I fumbled for the phone. "Yes? What is it?" I mumbled. "Miss Archer, there's someone here claiming to be your husband." The confused voice of the doorman crackled through the line. "He's demanding to be let up, but I know you have that restraining order in place." I was abruptly wide awake, icy tendrils of dread lancing through me. Sure enough, I could make out the muffled shouting of an all-too-familiar voice echoing up from the lobby. "Don't let him anywhere near this building," I ordered, my tone brooking no argument as I slipped from bed and began hastily dressing. "I'm calling the police right now." "Yes, ma'am." "Alerting security as well." I could still hear Kyle's drunken bellowing faintly through the line as I jammed my feet into a pair of shoes. That reckless idiot, did he really think he could just violate the protection order without consequences? Then again, he'd never been one to think things through. His arrogance and temper were about to be his undoing once again. I threw on a coat over my pajamas and stormed out into the hallway, stabbing at the elevator call button with far more force than necessary. The doors opened with an obedient ding, but I barely registered them as I continued mashing the button furiously. Stupid, worthless piece of... "Whoa! Hey!" A startled voice made me spin around. A young man in a bathrobe stood there gaping at me, his eyes wide. Just a neighbor, clearly bemused by my behavior. You need to take it easy there, ma'am, he said carefully, as if talking someone down from a ledge. It's just an elevator, yeah. No need to bash the thing up. I opened my mouth to issue a blistering retort, but the words died in my throat as a sudden crash echoed from the stairwell down the hall, following by the unmistakable sounds of shouting and a scuffle. Get off me! You rent-a-cop morons! That psycho bitch is my wife. My heart plummeted into my stomach as I recognized Kyle's voice. He was here, in the building. Somehow he'd slipped past the security downstairs. The stairwell door burst open, and Kyle came tumbling through, grappling with two large guards in ill-fitting uniforms. A lamp went crashing to the floor in the melee, and the neighbor let out a strangled yelp as he flattened himself against the wall. You! Kyle's bloodshot eyes landed on me with feral hatred as the guards struggled to subdue his flailing limbs. You did this to me, you miserable barren hag! You took everything from me! Shards of glass crunched underfoot as he broke free for just a moment, lunging at me with outstretched hands as if to wring my neck. The guards recovered quickly, seizing him by the shoulders and slamming him face first into the wall with sickening force. Get him out of here, I said quietly, adrenaline thrumming through me as I watched Kyle's pathetic form slump to the floor. And make sure he gets booked this time. The wail of approaching sirens echoed up from the street below, announcing the cavalry's arrival. I lifted my chin, refusing to let that sniveling worm see me flinch or show any weakness whatsoever. This was just another hiccup in my long-game agenda, a minor inconvenience that would barely dent the surface of the torment I had in store for Kyle, one that would never, ever stop until he was utterly erased from existence. As the police stormed in to subdue and haul away my raving soon-to-be ex-husband, I turned and headed back towards my apartment, chin held high. Kyle could scream and rage all he wanted. It only made my ultimate victory all the sweeter. The neighbor was still frozen against the wall, staring at me with a mixture of horror and awe. I offered him a thin smile as I passed. You may want to get those locks changed, dear, I said lightly. This building clearly has a bit of a pest problem. I sipped my mimosa leisurely, basking in the warm California sun filtering through the patio doors. Laughter and cheerful chatter drifted over from where my husband Nathan played an energetic game of tag with our rambunctious 5-year-old son in the backyard. Mommy, Mommy, did you see me run from Daddy? The little whirlwind came barreling over, his cheeks flushed with exertion and delight. I saw, baby, I chuckled, ruffling his tousled brown hair. You're getting so fast. Not fast enough to outrun me forever. Nathan joined us with a roguish grin, scooping up our giggling son and pelting him with raspberries against his neck. I watched the tender scene with a sense of contentment settling over me like a warm blanket. To think, just a few years ago I had been trapped in a bitter, loveless marriage headed for an inevitable explosion. If someone had told me back then that this kind of happiness and peace was in my future, I would have laughed in their face. Yet, here I was, the proud mother of the child I'd longed for, sharing my life with a caring partner who adored me. All because I'd had the strength to walk away from the toxic situation with my previous husband and take my future into my own hands. Nathan set our son down, allowing him to scamper off towards the swing set before settling onto the patio lounge beside me. He draped an arm around my shoulders, pressing a kiss to my temple. You look so beautiful sitting here like the queen you are. He murmured in that deep timbre that still made my heart flutter after all this time. I leaned into his embrace with a contented sigh. I'm just relieved we were able to have this, I said honestly. For so long, I thought motherhood was an impossible dream. Well, you never gave up on that dream despite everything, Nathan said fondly. That's one of the things I admire most about you, Viv. Your perseverance in the face of adversity is downright awe-inspiring. A wry smile tugged at my lips as I thought about just how strong I'd had to be to overcome the adversity of my failed first marriage, to dismantle my ex's entire existence through sheer grit and determination, ensuring he was left with a ruined husk of a life as penance. Of course, Nathan knew none of those unsavory details. I'd been careful to keep that dark period tightly under wraps, not wanting its poison to seep into my fresh start. As far as he and the rest of the world were concerned, I was simply a successful career woman who had prioritized her goals for many years before allowing love into her life again. They didn't need to know the brutal lengths I'd gone to in order to enact my ultimate revenge. How I'd systematically stripped my ex of his finances, his business, his reputation, until he was left homeless on the streets, a broken, destitute shell of a man. A harsh punishment, to be sure, but a fitting one after the way he'd betrayed and tormented me over my infertility. You know, I actually ran into Kyle the other day. Nathan suddenly spoke up, jarring me from my thoughts. Well, I should say he ran into me while panhandling on the street. My blood froze in my veins at the mention of that name, the one remnant of my dark past that I could never fully escape, no matter how much I tried to bury it. He's really in a bad way these days, Nathan went on, oblivious to my discomfort, raving about some grand injustice being done to him, how his life was stolen away by a vindictive woman. I kept my expression carefully neutral, even as my heart thudded against my ribcage. So my masterful machinations had reduced Kyle to a delusional, rambling beggar spouting conspiracies to anyone who would listen. Fitting, in a tragically poetic way. Nathan shook his head sadly. I almost felt sorry for the guy, to be honest, until he got aggressive and started shouting threats, that is. Had to call the cops to get him to move along. I see, I said tightly, grateful when our son came bounding over to recapture Nathan's attention. I took a long pull from my mimosa, willing my body to release its tension. The truth was, I didn't feel even an ounce of pity for the broken man Kyle had become. He was simply reaping what he'd sown through his vile actions all those years ago. A waking nightmare of his own making that he was doomed to endure, alone and forgotten by the world. Perhaps someday I would be able to purge him from my thoughts completely and bask in this new life I'd built without any lingering shadows. But until then, I would wear the scars of my trials like badges of honor, reminders of my strength. After all, I was the one who had risen from the ashes to become unstoppable. And I would never let anyone make me a victim again. If you ever lay a hand on me again, I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your miserable life. The words tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop them, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and rage as I stared into the cold, unforgiving eyes of my husband, Derek. His fist clenched at his side, knuckles white with fury, and for a moment I thought he might strike me again. But then a twisted smile spread across his lips, and he let out a low, menacing chuckle that sent shivers down my spine. You think you can threaten me, Mallory? He spat, taking a step closer. You're nothing without me. You'd be lost, alone, and penniless if it weren't for my generosity. I swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill down my cheeks. This wasn't the first time Derek had lashed out at me, but it was the first time I dared to stand up to him. For too long, I'd been trapped in this gilded cage, blinded by the illusion of the perfect life we'd built together. From the outside, we were the picture of success. A powerful business mogul and his doting wife raising our beautiful daughter, Ava, in a sprawling mansion in the heart of the city. But behind closed doors, Derek's true nature revealed itself, a toxic blend of manipulation and control that had slowly isolated me from my friends and family. I'm warning you, Derek, I said, my voice quivering despite my best efforts to sound strong. If you ever touch me or Ava again, I'll leave, and I'll make sure you never find us. His eyes narrowed, and for a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of fear cross his features. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by that familiar smirk that made my skin crawl. You're not going anywhere, he growled, closing the distance between us. You're mine, Mallory, and if you ever try to leave, I'll make sure you regret it. With that, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the room, leaving me alone with the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. I sank to the floor, my body racked with sobs as the reality of my situation crashed down around me. I had to get out. For Ava's sake, and for my own. But how? Derek had made it clear that he wouldn't let us go without a fight, and I knew firsthand how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. As the tears streamed down my face, I silently vowed to find a way. No matter what it took, I would break free from Derek's grip and build a life for Ava and myself. far away from his toxic influence. It was time to stop living in fear and take back control of my life. The next few days were a blur of tension and unease. Derek's outburst had shaken me to my core, but I knew I couldn't let fear paralyze me. I had to act, for Ava's sake, if not my own. As I went about my daily routine, I found myself constantly on edge, jumping at every sound, every movement in my peripheral vision. Derek, for his part, seemed to revel in my discomfort, shooting me smug glances whenever our paths crossed. "Mom, are you okay?" Ava asked one evening as we sat down for dinner, her brow furrowed with concern. "You've been acting really weird lately." I forced a smile, reaching across the table to give her hand a reassuring squeeze. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little stressed at work, that's all." Derek scoffed, shaking his head. "Your mother's always been a worrier, Ava. It's nothing new." His words cut deep, but I bit my tongue, unwilling to provoke another confrontation in front of our daughter. Instead, I turned my attention back to Ava, determined to keep our conversation light and casual. But as the days wore on, it became increasingly difficult to maintain the facade. Derek's verbal jabs grew more frequent, more pointed, and I found myself constantly on the defensive, struggling to keep my composure. It all came to a head one night after Ava had gone to bed. Derek and I were alone in the living room, and he wasted no time in launching into another tirade. "You think you're so high and mighty, don't you?" he sneered. His words slurred from the countless glasses of scotch he'd downed. "You think you're better than me, but you're nothing without my money and my name." "That's not true," I protested, my voice trembling. "I've worked just as hard as you have to build this life for our family." He let out a harsh laugh, shaking his head. "You're delusional, Mallory. You're nothing but a pretty face, a trophy wife to hang on my arm and make me look good." Before I could react, he was on his feet, towering over me with a look of pure rage twisting his features. "Maybe I need to remind you of your place," he growled, raising his hand as if to strike me. I flinched, bracing myself for the blow, but it never came. Instead, Derek stumbled backward, nearly losing his balance as he glared at me with a mixture of contempt and something else, something I couldn't quite place. "You're pathetic," he spat, turning on his heel and storming out of the room, leaving me shaken and wondering how much longer I could endure this living hell. As I sat there in the silence, my mind raced, trying to make sense of the turmoil that had become my life. I knew I had to get out, but the thought of leaving filled me with a paralyzing fear. What if Derek found us? What if he made good on his threats? I jumped as my phone buzzed, pulling me from my dark thoughts. It was a text from Samantha, my best friend and the only person I trusted enough to confide in. "Are you okay? I have a bad feeling about Derek. Please tell me you're safe." Tears stung my eyes as I read her words, a wave of relief washing over me. Samantha had always been my rock, my voice of reason in the darkest of times. Maybe, just maybe, she could help me find the strength to break free. With trembling fingers, I typed out a response. "I need your help." Samantha's arrival was like a breath of fresh air. As soon as she stepped through the door, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, the tension that had been coiling inside me for weeks finally beginning to unravel. "Oh, honey?" she murmured, pulling me into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry you've been going through this alone." I clung to her, fighting back tears as the floodgates threatened to open. "I don't know what to do, Sam. He's become so volatile, so unpredictable. I'm scared for Ava and myself." She pulled back, her eyes blazing with a fierce determination. "You're going to leave him. That's what you're going to do." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Leave Derek? The thought had crossed my mind more times than I could count, but the fear of his retaliation had always held me back. "I can't," I whispered, shaking my head. "You know how vindictive he can be. If I try to leave, he'll make our lives a living hell." Samantha's grip on my shoulders tightened, her gaze unwavering. "Mallory, listen to me. You are stronger than this. You have to be strong, for Ava's sake, if not your own. Derek is a monster, and you can't let him control you any longer." Her words struck a chord deep within me, igniting a spark of defiance that I thought had long since been extinguished. She was right. I couldn't let Derek continue to hold this power over me, over our family. "Okay," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "Okay, I'll do it. I'll leave him." Samantha's face broke into a relieved smile, and she pulled me into another fierce hug. Thank God. We'll figure this out, Mal. I promise. You and Ava are going to be safe. Over the next few days, we hatched our plan. Samantha helped me open a secret bank account, squirreling away as much money as I could without arousing Derek's suspicion. We researched safe houses, potential places we could go to start over, far away from his reach. All the while, I walked on eggshells around Derek, careful not to give him any inkling of my intentions. But the strain was starting to show, and he grew increasingly suspicious of my behavior. "What's going on with you lately?" he demanded one night, cornering me in the kitchen. "You've been acting strange, distant." I forced a smile, willing my hands not to tremble. "It's nothing, Derek. I've just been stressed with work, that's all." His eyes narrowed and he took a step closer, backing me against the counter. "Don't lie to me, Mallory. I know when you're hiding something." My heart pounded in my chest as he leaned in, his breath hot on my face. "If I find out you're up to something, you'll regret it. Do you understand?" I nodded mutely, too terrified to speak. Derek held my gaze for a few more agonizing seconds before turning and stalking out of the room, leaving me shaken to my core. As soon as he was gone, I sank to the floor, burying my face in my hands as the sobs racked my body. How much longer could I keep this up? How much longer before Derek saw through my lies and unleashed his fury upon us? I knew then that I had to act fast. Our lives depended on it. It all came crashing down one fateful night. I should have been more careful, more vigilant, but in my desperation to gather enough funds for our escape, I grew careless. I had just returned from a clandestine meeting with Samantha, slipping the latest cash withdrawal into the hidden compartment in my closet, when I heard the unmistakable sound of Derek's footsteps approaching. My heart dropped into my stomach as he flung open the bedroom door, his face contorted with rage. In his hand, he clutched a crumpled envelope, one of the many I had used to squirrel away our escape money. "What is this?" he snarled, brandishing the envelope like a weapon. "What the hell have you been up to, Mallory?" I froze, my mind racing as I scrambled for an excuse, any lie that might defuse the situation. But Derek was having none of it. In a flash, he crossed the room and yanked open the closet door, his eyes widening as he discovered the hidden stash of cash. "You lying bitch," he growled, whirling on me with a look of pure fury. "You were planning to leave me, weren't you?" I tried to speak, to explain, but the words caught in my throat as Derek advanced on me, his fists clenched at his sides. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" he roared, spittle flying from his lips. "You ungrateful whore." Before I could react, his hand lashed out, striking me across the face with such force that I stumbled backwards, stars dancing before my eyes. "Derek, please," I begged, tasting blood on my split lip. "I was only trying to protect Ava and myself. You've become so volatile, so abusive. I couldn't take it anymore." His eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of remorse cross his features. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a cold, calculating fury that chilled me to the bone. "You're not going anywhere," he hissed, grabbing a fistful of my hair and wrenching my head back. "You belong to me, Mallory, and if you ever try to leave again, I swear to God, I'll take everything from you, including Ava." The mention of our daughter's name sent a wave of panic crashing over me. I couldn't let him hurt her, not my sweet, innocent Ava. "Please, Derek," I sobbed, clawing at his iron grip. "Don't bring her into this. She's just a child." He let out a cruel laugh, his grip tightening until I thought my scalp might tear. "She's my child too, Mallory. And if you think you can take her away from me, you're sorely mistaken." With a final, vicious yank, he released me, sending me crumpling to the floor in a heap. As I lay there, cradling my throbbing head, I knew in that moment that our lives were in grave danger. We had to get out, and fast, before Derek's rage spiraled out of control. Because this time, I feared there would be no coming back. The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. As soon as Derek stormed out of the bedroom, I sprang into action, my mind laser-focused on one goal: getting Ava and myself out of that house before it was too late. I scrambled to gather our essentials: a few changes of clothes, our passports, and the meager stash of cash I had managed to squirrel away before Derek discovered my plan. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough to get us started on our new life, wherever that may be. My hands trembled as I packed, my heart pounding in my chest with each passing minute. I knew Derek wouldn't be gone long, and when he returned, his fury would be tenfold. As if on cue, I heard the unmistakable sound of his car pulling into the driveway, the tires crunching on the gravel like a death knell. I had to move fast. Abandoning the half-packed bag, I raced down the hall to Ava's room, bursting through the door to find her sitting cross-legged on her bed, earbuds in and oblivious to the chaos unfolding around her. "Ava!" I hissed, startling her from her reverie. "We have to go now." Her eyes widened, confusion and fear flickering across her delicate features. "Mom, what's going on? What's happening?" I grabbed her by the shoulders, my grip perhaps a little too tight as I fought to keep my panic at bay. "There's no time to explain. We have to leave before your father gets back. Our lives depend on it." She must have seen the desperation in my eyes, because she didn't argue or question me further. With a shaky nod, she rose from the bed and followed me back to the bedroom, where I hurriedly stuffed the last of our belongings into the bag. The sound of the front door slamming sent a jolt of terror through me, and I froze, my heart in my throat. "Mallory!" Derek's voice boomed from downstairs, laced with a menacing fury that made my blood run cold. "Where the hell are you, you lying bitch?" Ava whimpered, her eyes wide with fear, and I knew we had to move, now or never. Slinging the bag over my shoulder, I grabbed her hand and pulled her towards the bedroom window, my mind racing as I formulated our escape route. "We're going out this way," I whispered, already working to pry open the stubborn pain. "There's a trellis on the side of the house. We can climb down and make a run for the car." Ava nodded, her face pale but resolute. In that moment, I saw a strength in her that I hadn't realized she possessed, a steely determination that filled me with equal parts pride and sorrow. No child should ever have to experience the horrors we had endured. With a final heave, the window gave way, and I ushered Ava through, following close behind, just as the sound of Derek's thunderous footsteps reached the top of the stairs. We moved quickly, silently, our hearts pounding in tandem as we shimmied down the trellis and hit the ground running. The car was just ahead, our salvation glinting in the moonlight like a beacon of hope. But as we neared it, a figure emerged from the shadows, blocking our path. "Derek? Going somewhere?" He sneered, his eyes glinting with a feral madness that sent chills down my spine. In that moment, time seemed to slow to a crawl. I could see the rage etched into every line of Derek's face, the hatred burning in his eyes as he stared us down like cornered prey. And in that moment, I knew. There was no going back. The days and weeks that followed our escape were a blur of constant motion, a never-ending cycle of fleeing and hiding. We couldn't risk staying in one place for too long, not with Derek's resources and his unquenchable thirst for revenge. Samantha had been our lifeline, our guardian angel in those early days. She helped us secure false identities, safe houses, and transportation as we hopscotched across the country, always one step ahead of Derek's hired goons. But the psychological toll of living in perpetual fear was immense. Ava, my once vibrant and carefree daughter, grew sullen and withdrawn, her eyes haunted by the horrors she had witnessed. And I, too, found myself jumping at every shadow, every unexpected sound, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. Still, we persevered, driven by the knowledge that the alternative, falling back into Derek's clutches, was unthinkable. It was during one of our brief respites, holed up in a dingy motel on the outskirts of some nameless town, that the first crack in our defenses appeared. "Mom, how much longer are we going to have to keep running?" Ava asked, her voice small and defeated as she stared out the grimy window. I swallowed hard, my heart aching at the weariness etched into her young features. "As long as it takes, sweetheart, until we're sure your father can't find us." She turned to face me, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "But what if he never stops looking? What if we have to spend the rest of our lives like this, always running, always afraid?" The questions hung heavy in the air, their weight crushing me under the weight of their implications. Because deep down, I knew she was right. Derek was a man possessed, and he would stop at nothing to track us down, to exact his twisted brand of revenge. "I don't know, Ava," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion, "but I promise you, we'll find a way to make it through this. Together." She nodded, but the spark of hope in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by a weary resignation that broke my heart. In that moment, I vowed to find a way to end this nightmare, once and for all. We couldn't go on living like this, constantly looking over our shoulders, our lives forever tainted by the specter of Derek's rage. It was time to take the fight to him. Over the next few weeks, I began to hatch a plan, reaching out to old contacts, calling in favors, and assembling a team of people I could trust to help bring Derek down. It was a risky gambit, but one I was willing to take if it meant finally securing our freedom. And then, just when I thought we had hit another dead end, a break in the case arrived in the form of an anonymous tip. Derek's location, his movements, his routine. It was the opportunity we had been waiting for, the chance to strike back and end this twisted game of cat and mouse once and for all. As I relayed the information to my team, a sense of grim determination settled over me. This was it, the moment we had been preparing for. The showdown was inevitable, and only one of us would emerge victorious. I only hoped that when the dust settled, Ava and I would be the ones left standing. The safe house was a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of town, its weathered exterior belying the high-tech command center that lay within. As I stepped through the reinforced steel door, my heart was pounding in my chest, a heady mix of adrenaline and trepidation coursing through my veins. "You're sure about this, Mal?" Samantha's voice broke the tense silence, her eyes searching mine for any hint of doubt or hesitation. "There's no going back after tonight." I took a deep breath, steeling my resolve as I gave her a curt nod. "I'm sure Derek has to be stopped once and for all, for Ava's sake, if not my own." She pursed her lips, clearly not thrilled with the plan but respecting my decision nonetheless. "All right then, let's get this show on the road." Around us, the team of ex-military operatives and private investigators I had assembled sprang into action, checking weapons and running final system diagnostics. The air was thick with tension, the weight of what was to come hanging over us like a shroud. "We have eyes on the target," came a gruff voice from the comm station, shattering the silence. "He's just left his office and is en route to the rendezvous point." My breath caught in my throat as a grainy image of Derek flickered onto the main monitor. His face twisted into a scowl as he stalked towards his waiting car. Seeing him again, even through the distorted lens of a surveillance camera, sent a chill down my spine and reignited the smoldering embers of fear and rage that had burned within me for so long. "Remember, we need him alive," I reminded the team, my voice steadier than I felt. "At least for now, he has to face justice for what he's done." A chorus of grunts and nods met my words. The men and women around me hardened professionals who understood the gravity of the situation. Still, I couldn't shake the nagging sense of dread that had taken root in the pit of my stomach. What if something went wrong? What if Derek managed to slip through our grasp once again, disappearing into the ether and leaving us to pick up the pieces of our shattered lives? I pushed the doubts aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. This was our one shot, our chance to end this nightmare once and for all. Failure was not an option. The minutes ticked by like hours as we waited with bated breath, tracking Derek's movements on the monitors until finally the call came in. He's arrived at the rendezvous point, moving into position. My heart leapt into my throat as the team sprang into action, donning tactical gear and checking weapons one last time before filing out of the safe house and into the waiting armored vehicles. "Stay safe," Samantha murmured, pulling me into a fierce hug. "And give that bastard hell for me." I nodded, unable to find the words as a lump formed in my throat. This was it, the moment I had been both dreading and anticipating for what felt like an eternity. As the convoy roared to life and peeled out onto the deserted street, I found myself gripping the edge of the console, my knuckles white with tension. Every fiber of my being was focused on the mission, on the confrontation that was about to unfold. Derek's reign of terror was about to come to an end. One way or another, tonight would be the end of the road, and I would be the one to put the final nail in his coffin. The days and weeks following Derek's capture were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and the long, arduous process of picking up the pieces of our shattered lives. But through it all, a weight had been lifted, a burden that had pressed down on Ava and me for far too long. As the truth about Derek's abuse and his relentless pursuit of us came to light, The world seemed to hold its collective breath, transfixed by the sordid tale of a once powerful man brought low by his own monstrous actions. And while the court of public opinion was swift and merciless in its condemnation, it was the judicial system's reckoning that truly mattered. The trial was a grueling ordeal, with Derek's high-priced legal team doing everything in their power to cast doubt on our testimony and paint him as the victim. But in the end, the evidence was too overwhelming, the pattern of abuse too well documented to be denied. When the guilty verdict was read, a hush fell over the courtroom, broken only by the soft sound of Derek's sobs as he was led away in chains. In that moment, I felt a sense of vindication, of justice finally being served after years of living in fear and torment. But more than that, I felt a profound sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, allowing me to breathe freely for the first time in what felt like an eternity. In the days and weeks that followed, Ava and I began the slow process of rebuilding our lives, piece by shattered piece. It wasn't easy. The scars of our ordeal ran deep, both physical and emotional, but we were determined to forge ahead, to reclaim the happiness and sense of security that had been stolen from us for far too long. Samantha was a constant source of strength and support, her unwavering friendship a lifeline that helped us navigate the choppy waters of our newfound freedom. Together, we found a cozy little apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a far cry from the opulent prison we had once called home. But to me, it was a palace, a sanctuary where we could finally let our guard down and begin to heal. As the months passed, I watched with a mixture of pride and wonder as Ava blossomed before my eyes, the shadows that had haunted her gaze gradually giving way to a newfound sense of joy and optimism. She threw herself into her studies, determined to make the most of the second chance we had been given, and I couldn't have been prouder of the strong, resilient young woman she was becoming. For my part, I found solace in the simple pleasures of life. Long walks in the park, lazy Sunday mornings spent curled up with a good book, and evenings spent laughing and reminiscing with Samantha over a bottle of wine. It was a far cry from the high-powered corporate world I had once inhabited, but in many ways it was infinitely more fulfilling. And through it all, the specter of Derek's legacy faded, his once formidable presence reduced to a mere footnote in the story of our lives. We had survived his reign of terror, emerging from the ashes stronger and more resilient than ever before. As I watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was excited to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Because now, we were free to chart our own course, to write our own story, and to embrace the future with open arms. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. Marrying him might have saved my life, but living with him almost destroyed it. Those haunting words echoed in my mind as I stared at the ornate mirror, the golden frame, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within me. It had all started with a chance encounter at a charity gala, where Alex Preston's charming smile and captivating presence had swept me off my feet. A whirlwind courtship followed, filled with lavish dates, heartfelt promises, and the assurance that he was the man of my dreams. Little did I know that underneath that polished exterior lurked a web of deceit so tangled that it would almost suffocate me. "Eliza, darling, are you ready?" Alex's voice drifted through the bedroom door, snapping me back to reality. "Just a minute," I called out, forcing a smile onto my face as I smoothed the silky fabric of my dress. As I stepped out, Alex's eyes raked over me appreciatively. "You look stunning, my love." He leaned in, planting a kiss on my cheek, his familiar cologne enveloping me. The ride to the Preston family estate was filled with idle chatter, but my mind wandered to the events that had brought me here. Barely 6 months ago, I had been a carefree, independent woman, content with my career and social circle. Then, Alex swept in, spinning tales of undying love and a future filled with happiness. Little did I know that by accepting his proposal, I was stepping into a gilded cage. The estate loomed before us, its imposing architecture a testament to the family's wealth and prestige. As we entered, a figure emerged from the shadows, her sharp gaze immediately fixing on me. "Vivian, I'd like you to meet my wife, Eliza," Alex said, his voice tinged with pride. Vivian, Alex's older sister, offered a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome to the family, Eliza." In that moment, I sensed an undercurrent of tension, a subtle warning that all was not as it seemed within the walls of this grand estate. As the evening progressed, surrounded by Alex's closest friends and business associates, I found myself drowning in a sea of polite conversations and forced smiles. Vivian's calculating glances only added to my growing unease. It wasn't until later, when the guests had dispersed and Alex had retired for the night, that I allowed myself to confront the nagging doubts that had taken root. Seated in the dimly lit library, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had entered a world far more complex and dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The question was, would I have the strength to untangle myself from this web before it consumed me completely? The grand foyer of the Preston estate should have filled me with awe, but instead, a sense of unease crept over me as I stepped inside my new home. The opulent chandeliers cast a warm glow, yet the atmosphere felt chilly and unwelcoming. "Let me show you around," Alex said, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back as he guided me through the winding corridors. Each room was more extravagant than the last, from the sprawling living area adorned with priceless antiques to the state-of-the-art kitchen that could have belonged in a five-star restaurant. It was a world of wealth and privilege I had never experienced before. "And this will be our bedroom," Alex announced, pushing open a set of double doors to reveal a lavish suite that could have easily accommodated a small palace. As I took in the plush furnishings and the breathtaking view from the floor-to-ceiling windows, a movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention. Vivian stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her gaze piercing. "Impressive, isn't it?" she remarked, her tone laced with sarcasm. "I hope you'll be comfortable here, Eliza." Before I could respond, Alex stepped forward, his demeanor shifting from doting husband to protective brother. "Vivian, I thought we discussed this. Eliza is my wife now, and she deserves to be treated with respect." Vivian's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw a flicker of contempt cross her features. "Of course, dear brother, I wouldn't dream of making your precious wife feel unwelcome." With a curt nod, she turned on her heel and disappeared down the hallway, leaving an uncomfortable silence in her wake. "Don't mind her," Alex murmured, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Vivian has always been a little difficult." His touch, once comforting, now felt suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was far more to this sibling rivalry than met the eye. Over the next few weeks, I found myself walking on eggshells, constantly navigating the minefield of tensions that permeated the estate. Vivian's presence was like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over every interaction, her cutting remarks and icy glares leaving me feeling unsettled and unwelcome in my own home. "You shouldn't let her get to you," Alex would say, his reassuring words ringing hollow in the face of Vivian's open hostility. But it wasn't just Vivian's behavior that set my nerves on edge. There were subtle shifts in Alex's demeanor, too. The way he would dismiss my concerns with a wave of his hand, or the way his touch would linger a little too long, as if he were trying to assert his dominance. It was during one of these moments, as he gripped my arm a little too tightly while chastising me for some perceived misstep, that I caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, a flicker of cruelty that sent shivers down my spine. In that instant, I realized that the man I had married was not the charming, loving soul he had pretended to be. There was a darkness lurking beneath the surface, and I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about him. As I lay awake that night, Alex's even breathing beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had somehow become trapped in a gilded cage with no idea how to escape. The sound of raised voices echoed through the study, shattering the usual tranquility of the estate. Curiosity got the better of me as I crept closer, the muffled words becoming clearer. "Can't keep sweeping this under the rug, Alex. The shareholders are getting restless." It was Vivian's voice, sharp and accusatory. My heart raced as I pressed my ear against the door, straining to make out Alex's response. "I have it under control," he snapped, his tone laced with irritation. "The last thing we need is for word to get out about our creative accounting practices." "Creative accounting practices?" My mind whirled as the implications of those words sank in. Could Alex be involved in something illegal? Before I could ponder further, the sound of footsteps approaching sent me scurrying away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I busied myself with straightening the vase on the hallway table, trying to appear nonchalant as Vivian emerged from the study, her face flushed with anger. "Eliza," she said curtly, her gaze sweeping over me with undisguised disdain. "I didn't realize you were lurking about." "I wasn't," I stammered, my palms growing clammy. "I was just passing by." Vivian's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought she might call out my lie. But then her expression softened ever so slightly, and she leaned in closer. "You should be careful, Eliza," she murmured, her voice low and laced with warning. "There are things happening in this family that you know nothing about." Before I could respond, she had swept past me, leaving me reeling in her wake. What did she mean by that? Was she implying that Alex was involved in something illegal, something that could put our entire family at risk? The questions swirled in my mind, but I knew better than to confront Alex directly. Instead, I bided my time, keeping my eyes and ears open for any clue that might shed light on the shadows that seemed to be closing in around us. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon my first piece of evidence. Late one night, as Alex worked at his desk in the study, I slipped in under the guise of bringing him a nightcap. As I placed the glass on the desk, a folder caught my eye, a collection of financial statements and ledgers, their pages littered with suspicious-looking entries and crossed-out figures. My heart pounded as I glimpsed the words Shell Corporation and offshore accounts scrawled in the margins. I knew then that my suspicions were well-founded. Alex was involved in something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. As the weeks passed, I became a silent observer, gathering what information I could while maintaining a careful facade of ignorance. Whispered conversations, coded emails, and furtive glances all added to the mounting pile of evidence that pointed to one inescapable truth. My husband was a liar and a cheat, and the very foundation of our marriage was built on deceit. Yet even as the walls closed in around us, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope that perhaps I could find a way to untangle this tangled web before it consumed us both. The soft glow of the bedside lamp cast eerie shadows across the room as I pored over the documents scattered on the desk. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, each one revealing a new layer of Alex's deception. Financial statements riddled with discrepancies, emails detailing shady business dealings, and a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The evidence was damning, and yet a part of me still clung to the hope that there was some innocent explanation, some misunderstanding that could justify the chaos unfolding before my eyes. It was then that the ping of an incoming message shattered the silence, the sound making me jump. Alex's phone vibrated on the nightstand, the screen illuminating with a new notification. Against my better judgment, I reached for it, my heart pounding in my chest. The message was innocuous at first glance. A simple, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow" from a contact labeled Jessica. But as I scrolled further, my breath caught in my throat. Message after message, each one more explicit than the last, painted a clear picture of Alex's infidelity. "Missing your touch. Counting down the hours until I can hold you again. You know how much I crave you." The words blurred together as hot tears stung my eyes. The man I had trusted, the man I had loved with every fiber of my being, had been deceiving me from the start. His promises of devotion were nothing but hollow lies, his vows of fidelity cast aside with callous disregard. The sound of footsteps in the hallway jolted me back to reality, and I scrambled to gather the scattered documents, my hands shaking uncontrollably. In my haste, I knocked over a picture frame, the shattering glass echoing like a gunshot in the stillness of the night. The bedroom door flew open, and there stood Alex, his face contorted in a mixture of anger and fear. "What the hell are you doing?" he snarled, his eyes landing on the incriminating papers clutched in my trembling hands. My voice faltered as I struggled to form a coherent response, the weight of his betrayal crushing me from all sides. Alex's gaze hardened, and he advanced towards me, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. "You weren't supposed to see those," he hissed, snatching the documents from my grasp. "Alex, please? I pleaded, my heart pounding in my chest. Just tell me the truth. For a moment, his expression softened, and I dared to hope that he might offer an explanation, a chance to salvage the shattered remnants of our relationship. But then, his lips twisted into a cruel smile, and the illusion was shattered. The truth? He sneered, leaning in close enough for me to smell the whiskey on his breath. The truth is, you're nothing but a means to an end, Eliza, a pretty little trophy wife to help me maintain appearances while I take care of business. His words cut deep, each one a razor-sharp blade slicing through the fragile threads that had bound us together. In that moment, I knew there was no turning back, no chance for reconciliation. The man I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a monster driven by greed and deceit. If you breathe a word of this to anyone, Alex continued, his grip tightening around my wrist until I winced in pain, I'll make sure you regret the day you ever crossed me. As he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him, I sank to the floor, my body racked with sobs. The world as I knew it had come crashing down around me, leaving me adrift in a sea of lies and broken promises. But even as despair threatened to consume me, a flicker of determination ignited deep within. I would not be a victim, not anymore. It was time to take back control, no matter the cost. The heavy oak door creaked open, and Vivian slipped into the dimly lit library, her eyes scanning the room before settling on me. Eliza, what's going on? Your message sounded urgent. I took a deep breath, steeling my resolve. I know everything, Vivian, about Alex's illegal activities, his offshore accounts, his mistress. Vivian's expression hardened, and for a moment I thought she might deny it all. But then her shoulders sagged, and she sank into the nearest armchair, defeat etched across her features. So, he finally showed his true colors, she muttered, her voice laced with bitterness. I tried to warn you, Eliza, but you were too blinded by his charm to see the monster he really is. You knew? I felt a surge of anger rising within me. You knew what he was up to, and you didn't say anything? Vivian's gaze met mine, her eyes filled with a mixture of remorse and determination. I had my suspicions, but I could never get my hands on any solid proof. That snake always covered his tracks too well. Well, now we have the proof, I said, sliding the stack of incriminating documents across the table towards her. And we're going to use it to bring him down. Vivian's perfectly manicured brows arched in surprise. We? You want to take over the company, don't you? I pressed on, my voice gaining strength with each word. Well, this is our chance. Together, we can expose Alex's misdeeds and get him out of the way for good. A slow smile spread across Vivian's face, and for the first time I saw a glimmer of respect in her eyes. I have to admit, I underestimated you, Eliza. You've got more fire in you than I gave you credit for. She leaned forward, her gaze intense. All right, let's do this, but we have to be smart about it. Alex is a snake, and he'll stop at nothing to protect his precious empire. Over the next few days, Vivian and I pored over the evidence, meticulously cataloging every shred of proof, every damning email and suspicious transaction. It was a delicate dance, carefully planning our next moves while maintaining a facade of normalcy around Alex. The tension in the house was palpable, with Alex constantly on edge, his eyes narrowed in suspicion whenever Vivian and I were in the same room. But we played our parts well, acting the dutiful wife and the supportive sister, all the while plotting his downfall. Are you sure you're ready for this? Vivian asked one night as we finalized our strategy. Once we set this in motion, there's no going back. I thought of Alex's cruel words, the way he had threatened and belittled me, and a steely resolve settled over me. I'm ready. He's going to pay for what he's done, one way or another. The day of the board meeting arrived, and Vivian and I took our seats at the long mahogany table, our game faces firmly in place. Alex strode in, his confidence barely masking the undercurrent of tension that rippled through the room. As he launched into his polished presentation, projecting financial figures and growth projections onto the screen behind him, I caught Vivian's eye. A slight nod was all it took, and we made our move. Actually, Alex, Vivian's voice cut through the air like a knife, I think we should take a closer look at those numbers. Alex faltered, his bravado slipping for just a moment as Vivian began pulling up document after document, laying bare the truth about his misdeeds. The room erupted into chaos, with board members demanding explanations and lawyers scrambling to take notes. Through it all, Alex maintained a veneer of composure, his eyes darting between Vivian and me with a mixture of fury and disbelief. But as the evidence mounted, as the weight of his lies threatened to crush him, the mask finally slipped. "You'll pay for this, Eliza," he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "Mark my words, you'll regret the day you crossed me." But as I met his gaze, unflinching, I knew that the power had finally shifted. The tangled web of lies he had woven was unraveling before our very eyes, and there was no escape for the monster at its center. The boardroom descended into chaos as the full extent of Alex's deception was laid bare. Lawyers scribbled furiously, shareholders hurled accusations, and through it all, Alex stood frozen, his face contorted in a mask of fury. "How dare you?" he snarled, rounding on Vivian and me. "You have no idea what you've done." Vivian met his gaze, unflinching. "We know exactly what we've done, dear brother. We've exposed you for the liar and fraud that you are." A vein throbbed in Alex's temple as he struggled to maintain his composure. "This is all a misunderstanding," he insisted, his voice strained. "I can explain." "Save it, Alex," one of the board members snapped. "The evidence is overwhelming. Your underhanded dealings, the offshore accounts, the financial manipulations, it's all right here in black and white." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, and I could see the panic flickering in Alex's eyes as his carefully constructed facade crumbled around him. "You're making a grave mistake," he warned, his gaze shifting to me. "You'll regret this, Eliza." I squared my shoulders, refusing to be intimidated by his empty threats. "The only mistake was ever trusting you." As security guards moved in to escort him out, Alex lunged forward, his face twisted into an ugly snarl. "You'll pay for this, you little bitch!" Strong arms restrained him, but not before his fist connected with the side of my face, sending stars bursting across my vision. I stumbled backward, clutching my throbbing cheek, as Vivian rushed to my side. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I nodded, blinking back tears of pain and humiliation. "I'm fine. It's nothing compared to what he deserves." As Alex was dragged from the room, his curses and threats echoing down the hallway, a heavy silence settled over the boardroom. It was finally over. The tangled web of lies that had ensnared us all had been severed, and the monster at its center was exposed for the world to see. In the days and weeks that followed, the fallout from Alex's downfall rippled outward, like shockwaves from a seismic event. Lawsuits were filed, investigations launched, and the once mighty Preston empire teetered on the brink of collapse. Through it all, Vivian remained a steadfast ally, guiding the company through the turbulent waters with a deft hand. Together, we worked tirelessly to salvage what remained, to rebuild the tarnished reputation and restore the trust that Alex had so carelessly squandered. It wasn't easy. There were whispers and pointed stares, accusations and innuendo that threatened to drag us down into the mire of scandal. But we persevered, driven by a shared determination to rise from the ashes and forge a new path forward. As for Alex, his world crumbled around him in spectacular fashion. The once charming, larger-than-life figure was reduced to a mere shadow of his former self, his arrogance replaced by desperation as his allies deserted him one by one. I watched from afar as his lavish lifestyle unraveled, his expensive suits traded for prison jumpsuits, his palatial estate seized by the authorities. It was a fate he had brought upon himself, and yet a part of me still felt a twinge of sadness at the sight of his downfall. But that fleeting moment of pity was quickly overshadowed by a sense of triumph and relief. The nightmare was finally over. The tangled web that had ensnared me was no more, and I was free to reclaim the life that had been stolen from me. As I stood in the doorway of my new apartment, taking in the simple furnishings and the warm sunlight streaming through the windows, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This was a fresh start, a chance to leave the past behind and forge a new path on my own terms. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while I felt a glimmer of hope. I was no longer a victim, no longer a pawn in someone else's twisted game. I was a survivor, a warrior who had stared down the darkness and emerged victorious. And as I stepped out into the world, head held high, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the same unwavering resilience that had carried me through the storm. The headline screamed Alex's downfall, plastered across every newspaper and news channel in the country. Business mogul exposed as fraud, Preston empire crumbles amidst scandal, each headline more sensational than the last. As I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the sordid details of his misdeeds, a part of me still couldn't believe how swiftly everything had unraveled. Just weeks ago, Alex had been the picture of success, a titan of industry with the world at his feet. Now he was a disgraced pariah, his name synonymous with deceit and corruption. The real surprise, however, came in the form of the public's reaction. Instead of sympathy or outrage on his behalf, there was a pervasive sense of schadenfreude, a collective glee at witnessing the fall of a man who had lived so ostentatiously, so arrogantly. He had it coming, one commentator declared on a primetime news program. A man like that, with his penchant for excess and his blatant disregard for the rules, was bound to come crashing down eventually. As the days passed, the avalanche of negative publicity only intensified. Former business associates and allies distanced themselves, scrambling to salvage their own reputations. Even Alex's closest confidants turned on him, offering damning testimonies in exchange for leniency from the authorities. Through it all, Vivian remained a steadfast presence by my side, guiding the company through the turbulent waters with a deft hand. Together, we worked tirelessly to reshape the narrative, to restore the trust and credibility that had been shattered by Alex's actions. It wasn't an easy task. There were skeptics at every turn, those who doubted our ability to rise from the ashes of such a colossal scandal. But Vivian was relentless, her determination fueled by a burning desire to reclaim her family's legacy. This company was built on generations of hard work and integrity, she declared in a press conference, her steely gaze fixed on the cameras. We will not allow one man's greed and hubris to tarnish that. As the legal proceedings unfolded, Alex's once formidable empire crumbled around him. Assets were seized, bank accounts frozen, and his lavish lifestyle reduced to a mere memory. Gone were the designer suits and luxury cars, replaced by the drab uniforms and sterile confines of a prison cell. I caught glimpses of him during the highly publicized trial, his once confident demeanor replaced by a haunted, defeated expression. It was a far cry from the charming, charismatic figure who had once swept me off my feet, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity amidst the overwhelming sense of vindication. But that fleeting moment of empathy was quickly overshadowed by the memories of his cruelty, the way he had manipulated and betrayed me without a shred of remorse. This was the fate he had chosen for himself, and he would have to live with the consequences. As the final gavel fell, sealing Alex's fate with a lengthy prison sentence, a palpable sense of relief washed over me. The nightmare was finally over, the tangled web of lies that had ensnared me severed for good. In the aftermath, Vivian stepped forward to assume the mantle of leadership, her steady hand guiding the company through the turbulent waters of rebranding and restructuring. Under her guidance, the once tarnished empire began to regain its footing, slowly but surely clawing its way back to respectability. As for me, I found solace in the simplicity of my new life. Gone were the lavish trappings and the constant scrutiny that had once been my reality. In their place was a newfound sense of freedom, a chance to start anew without the suffocating weight of Alex's lies and manipulations. It wasn't an easy journey, of course. There were moments of doubt and vulnerability, times when the ghosts of the past threatened to drag me back into the darkness. But each time, I drew strength from the knowledge that I had survived, that I had emerged from the fire stronger and more resilient than ever before. As the months passed, the wounds began to heal, and a newfound sense of clarity took root. I was no longer defined by the trauma of my past, no longer a victim of circumstances beyond my control. I was a survivor, a warrior who had stared down the abyss and emerged victorious. And as I stepped out into the world, head held high, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the same unwavering determination that had carried me through the storm. The sun filtered through the sheer curtains, bathing my new apartment in a warm, golden glow. It was a far cry from the opulent grandeur of the Preston estate, but as I sipped my morning coffee, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This was my sanctuary, my safe haven from the chaos and turmoil of the past. Gone were the lavish trappings and the suffocating weight of expectation. In their place was a simple, uncluttered existence. A life of my own making, free from the tangled web of lies and manipulation that had once threatened to consume me. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my reverie, and I padded across the hardwood floor to answer it. Vivian stood on the other side, her signature power suit traded for a casual sundress, her face radiant with a genuine smile. "Good morning," she greeted me warmly, enveloping me in a sisterly embrace. "I thought I'd stop by and see how you're settling in." I ushered her inside, marveling at how far our relationship had come. Months ago, we had been adversaries, caught in the crosshairs of Alex's deceit. Now, we were allies, bound by a shared experience that had forged an unbreakable bond of trust and respect. "It's perfect," I assured her, gesturing around the cozy living room. "Simple, but perfect." Vivian nodded, her eyes sweeping over the space with a critical but approving gaze. "I'm glad. You deserve a fresh start, Eliza, a chance to rebuild your life on your own terms." We settled onto the plush sofa, and I couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in Vivian's demeanor. Gone was the sharp, calculating persona she had once worn like armor. In its place was a warmth and vulnerability that I had never seen before. "How are things at the company?" I asked, sipping my coffee. Vivian's smile faltered ever so slightly, a hint of weariness creeping into her expression. "It's been a challenge, to say the least. Rebuilding the brand, restoring trust with our partners and shareholders. It's been an uphill battle." "But you're doing it," I reassured her. "You're turning things around, slowly but surely." A spark of pride flickered in her eyes, and she nodded resolutely. "Yes, we are. It's not easy, but I'm determined to reclaim our family's legacy, to show the world that the Preston name still stands for something." As we lapsed into comfortable silence, I couldn't help but reflect on the incredible journey we had both undertaken. From the depths of despair and betrayal, we had risen like phoenixes from the ashes, emerging stronger and more resilient than ever before. The legal battles had been grueling, the emotional toll nearly overwhelming at times. But through it all, we had remained resolute, steadfast in our determination to see justice served and our lives restored. And now, as I looked around my humble abode, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. Gratitude for the strength that had carried me through the darkest of times, and for the unwavering support of the woman who had become more than just an ally. She was family, in the truest sense of the word. "Eliza," Vivian's voice broke the silence, her tone earnest. "I know words can never undo the trauma you endured, but I want you to know how deeply sorry I am for not seeing the truth sooner." I reached out, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "You have nothing to apologize for, Vivian. We were both caught in Alex's web of lies. The important thing is that we found our way out, together." A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips, and she nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude and understanding. In that moment, I knew that the scars of the past would never fully fade. The memories of Alex's cruelty, the bitter taste of betrayal, would always linger in the shadows of my mind. But I had emerged from the darkness stronger and more resilient than ever before. As I bid farewell to Vivian and settled back into the comfort of my new home, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of hope for the future. The tangled web that had once threatened to strangle me was severed, the monster at its center vanquished, and I was free to chart my own course. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of excitement rather than trepidation. I was no longer a victim, defined by the trauma of my past. I was a survivor, a warrior who had stared down the abyss and emerged victorious. And as I gazed out at the bustling city skyline, a world of possibilities stretched before me, waiting to be embraced with open arms. The shattering of glass pierced the silence of our living room. A framed photo lay smashed on the hardwood floor, the shards of glass glinting like tiny daggers. My hands trembled as I stared at the intruder standing before me, a woman clutching the hand of a young boy, his eyes wide with confusion. Richard, my husband of 23 years, stepped forward, his face ashen. "Dana, this is Jenna, and Lucas. They're my family, too." The words hung in the air, a suffocating weight pressing against my chest. I opened my mouth, but no sound escaped. How could this be happening? My perfect life, the life I had fought so hard to build, was crumbling before my eyes. "You have another family?" I finally managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. "How could you do this to us?" Richard's gaze dropped to the floor, unable to meet mine. "I'm sorry, Dana. I never meant for it to go this far." Jenna shifted uncomfortably, her grip on Lucas tightening. "Richard told me you knew about us. He said you were okay with the arrangement." My heart pounded in my ears as I struggled to comprehend the depth of his deception. Anger surged through me, burning away the shock. "You lied to her too? You're a coward, Richard, a coward and a liar!" Amelia, our 22-year-old daughter, emerged from her bedroom, her eyes wide with confusion. "Mom, what's going on?" Before I could respond, Richard stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Amelia, honey, I have something to tell you." "Save it," I snapped, my voice trembling with rage. "You've done enough damage. Get out of our house, Richard. Get out and never come back." Amelia's brow furrowed, and she looked from me to Richard, her gaze finally settling on Jenna and the child. Understanding dawned on her face, and her expression hardened. "You sick bastard," she spat, her words dripping with venom. Richard flinched as if struck. "Amelia, please, let me explain." "No," I shouted, my voice raw. "You don't get to explain anything. You've been living a lie, and now the truth is out. You made your choices, Richard, and now you have to face the consequences." Jenna's grip on Lucas loosened, and she took a tentative step forward. "Dana, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Just go. Take your son and get out of my house. I don't want to see either of you ever again." Tears welled in Jenna's eyes, but she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She turned and fled, Lucas trailing behind her, casting one last bewildered glance over his shoulder. Richard stood motionless, his face a mask of anguish. "Dana, please, we can work through this. I love you." I shook my head, my heart shattering with each word. "No, Richard. You lost the right to love me the moment you betrayed our family. Our marriage is over." As the weight of my words settled over us, a heavy silence descended. In that moment, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The life I had known, the love I had cherished, was gone, shattered like the broken frame on the floor. The weeks following Richard's departure were a blur. Amelia and I existed in a state of numb disbelief, the weight of his betrayal suffocating us with each passing day. We tried to resume our normal routines, but the empty spaces he left behind served as constant reminders of the life we had lost. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, staring vacantly at a stack of unpaid bills, Amelia emerged from her room, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her voice quivering with barely contained anger. I looked up, my heart sinking at the expression on her face. "What is it, honey?" Amelia tossed a thick manila envelope onto the table, scattering the bills. "I found this in Dad's office. It's everything. Bank statements, credit card receipts, proof of his double life." I reached for the envelope with trembling hands, dread coiling in my stomach. As I rifled through the contents, a sickening realization dawned on me. Richard hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been embezzling from his company, siphoning funds to support his secret family. "That bastard," Amelia spat, her fists clenched at her sides. "He's been lying to us for years, Mom. He's been stealing, cheating, and God knows what else." I felt bile rise in my throat as the full extent of Richard's deception became clear. "How could he do this to us?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Amelia's expression hardened, her eyes blazing with determination. "He's going to pay for this, Mom. We're going to make sure he pays." I stared at her, uncertainty gnawing at me. "What are you saying, Amelia?" She leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "I'm saying we expose him for the lying, thieving scumbag he is. We take all this evidence to his company, to the police. We burn his life to the ground, just like he did to ours." A part of me recoiled at the thought of such vengeance, but another, darker part couldn't deny the appeal of seeing Richard suffer the consequences of his actions. "What about Jenna and the kid?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They're caught up in this, too." Amelia's expression softened, just for a moment. "We'll reach out to Jenna. Maybe she'll see reason and help us take him down." I nodded slowly, my mind whirling with 1,000 different thoughts and emotions. "Okay," I said finally, my resolve hardening. "We'll do it. We'll make him pay for what he's done." Amelia's grim smile sent a shiver down my spine. Good, it's time we showed that lying piece of garbage what happens when you mess with the Whittaker women. As she turned and stalked back to her room, I couldn't help but wonder if we were embarking on a path we might one day regret. But in that moment, all I could feel was a burning desire for retribution. A need to see Richard suffer as we had suffered, to make him pay for the lies that had shattered our lives. In the days that followed, I found myself standing at a crossroads, torn between the desire for vengeance and the fear of diving headlong into a path of destruction. As I pored over the evidence Amelia had uncovered, the weight of Richard's betrayal threatened to crush me. Amelia, however, remained resolute, her determination unwavering. "We can't let him get away with this, Mom," she insisted, her voice laced with urgency. "He needs to face the consequences of his actions." I nodded numbly, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. A part of me longed to see Richard suffer, to watch as his carefully constructed facade crumbled around him. But another part, the part that still clung to the remnants of the love I once felt, recoiled at the thought of such vindictiveness. "What if we go too far?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if we become the monsters we're trying to destroy?" Amelia's expression softened, and she reached across the table to grip my hand. "Mom, we're not the ones who created this mess. We're just fighting to reclaim what's ours, our dignity, our self-respect. Richard is the one who chose to lie and cheat. He's the monster here." Her words resonated deep within me, igniting a spark of determination that had been flickering dangerously close to extinguishment. She was right. Richard had brought this upon himself, and it was time he faced the music. "You're right," I said, squeezing her hand. "We can't let him get away with this. We need to take him down, once and for all." Amelia's eyes gleamed with a mixture of relief and anticipation. "Good, then let's get to work." Over the next few days, we pored over the evidence, meticulously piecing together a timeline of Richard's deceit. Bank statements, credit card receipts, and damning emails painted a picture of a man consumed by greed and selfishness, willing to sacrifice everything, including his family, for his own desires. As we worked, I could feel the anger simmering within me, a slow burn that threatened to consume me if left unchecked. Each new revelation, each fresh betrayal, stoked the flames of my fury until I could barely contain the rage that coursed through my veins. Finally, we had everything we needed, a damning dossier of Richard's misdeeds, a veritable mountain of evidence that would bury him beneath the weight of his own lies. "It's time," Amelia said, her voice steely with determination. "Time to make that bastard pay." I nodded, my jaw clenched tight. Yes, it's time to end this, once and for all. As we stood there, united in our quest for retribution, I knew there was no turning back. Richard had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences, no matter how steep the price. With our dossier of evidence against Richard firmly in hand, Amelia and I knew it was time to take action. We couldn't move forward alone, not if we wanted to ensure Richard faced the full weight of his crimes. "We need help," Amelia said grimly, her fingers drumming against the tabletop. "Legal help." I nodded, my stomach churning with a mixture of apprehension and anticipation. "You're right. We'll need an attorney, someone who can navigate the legal system and make sure Richard can't wriggle his way out of this." Amelia's eyes narrowed, her jaw set in a hard line. "I know just the person." A few days later, we found ourselves seated across from Samantha Kendrick, a no-nonsense attorney with a reputation for taking on high-profile cases. As we laid out the evidence before her, her expression remained inscrutable, betraying none of the shock or disgust we had expected. "This is quite a dossier," she said at last, her voice calm and measured. "If even half of these allegations are true, your husband is in deep trouble." Amelia leaned forward, her eyes blazing with intensity. "Every single word is true, Miss Kendrick. That lying, cheating scumbag has been deceiving us for years, stealing from his company to fund his double life." Samantha held up a hand, silencing Amelia's outburst. "I believe you, Miss Whittaker. But belief alone won't be enough to convict your husband. We'll need concrete evidence, a paper trail that leaves no doubt as to his guilt." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "We understand. What do you need from us?" Over the next few weeks, Samantha guided us through the process of collecting additional evidence, ensuring that every I was dotted and every T was crossed. Her meticulous attention to detail was both reassuring and unsettling, a constant reminder of the gravity of the situation we found ourselves in. As our case against Richard grew stronger, Amelia and I faced another hurdle, the question of what to do about Jenna and her son, Lucas. They were collateral damage in Richard's web of lies, innocent victims caught up in his selfish scheme. "We should reach out to her," Amelia said one evening, her voice laced with a surprising note of compassion. "She might be willing to help us, especially if it means protecting Lucas." I hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. What if she's loyal to Richard? What if she refuses to cooperate? Amelia's expression hardened. Then we'll have to find another way. But we owe it to ourselves and to her to at least try. In the end, Jenna proved to be an unexpected ally, her anger and hurt at Richard's deception eclipsing any lingering loyalty she might have felt. She provided us with a wealth of information, corroborating our evidence and filling in the gaps in Richard's carefully constructed lies. As the final pieces fell into place, a sense of grim determination settled over us. We had done everything in our power to ensure that Richard would face the consequences of his actions, no matter how painful or devastating they might be. "It's time," Samantha said, her voice quiet but resolute. "Time to bring him down." Amelia and I exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between us. There was no turning back now. The wheels of justice had been set in motion, and Richard's world was about to come crashing down around him. As the days ticked by, a sense of foreboding settled over our household. Despite our meticulous preparations, a nagging doubt lingered in the back of my mind. What if Richard somehow managed to evade justice? What if, after everything we'd been through, he still found a way to escape the consequences of his actions? Amelia, ever the voice of reason, brushed aside my concerns with a wave of her hand. "He's not getting away this time, Mom. We've got him dead to rights." Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. It was as if a storm was brewing on the horizon, and we were caught in its inexorable path. My fears were confirmed one evening when Samantha called, her usually unflappable demeanor replaced by a sense of urgency. "We may have a problem," she said without preamble. "I've received word that your husband is planning to flee the country." The news hit me like a punch to the gut, stealing the breath from my lungs. "What? When? How?" Samantha's voice was grim. "From what my sources tell me, he's been liquidating assets and making arrangements to leave the country within the next few days. He's taking Jenna and the boy with him." Anger surged through me, hot and pulsing. The coward was running, trying to escape the consequences of his actions just as we were closing in. "That lying, spineless bastard," Amelia snarled, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. "He's not getting away that easily." I drew in a shaky breath, forcing myself to remain calm. "What do we do, Samantha? How do we stop him?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost picture Samantha weighing her options. We move forward with our plan, but we do it now, before he has a chance to disappear. We confront him, hit him with everything we've got, the evidence, the charges, all of it. We take away his ability to run. Amelia nodded, her jaw set in a hard line. "Let's do it. I'll call Jenna, make sure she's on board." As I hung up the phone, a sense of determination washed over me. We were so close, so tantalizingly close to seeing Richard face the consequences of his actions. I couldn't, let him wriggle free, not after everything he'd put us through. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as we finalized our plans. Jenna, her loyalty to Richard long since evaporated, agreed to testify against him, providing a damning first-hand account of his deception and manipulation. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. As we made our way to Richard's office, the weight of the moment pressed down upon us like a physical force. This was it. The culmination of weeks of planning, of pain and anger, and a burning desire for justice. Samantha squeezed my arm reassuringly. "It's going to be okay," she murmured. "We've got this." I nodded, forcing a tight smile. "I know. It's time for Richard to face the music." As we stepped into the building, I could feel the storm gathering around us, the winds of change whipping at our backs. There was no turning back now. The only way out was through, and I was determined to see this through to the bitter end, no matter the cost. The tension in the air was palpable as we strode into Richard's office, our footsteps echoing like thunderclaps in the hushed stillness. Samantha took the lead, her shoulders squared and her gaze unwavering, while Amelia and I flanked her on either side, our faces set in grim determination. Richard looked up from his desk, his expression morphing from surprise to confusion to outright panic as he registered our presence. "Dana? Amelia? What's going on?" Before he could say another word, Samantha stepped forward, brandishing a thick manila envelope. "Richard Whittaker, you're under investigation for embezzlement, fraud, and adultery." The color drained from Richard's face as the weight of Samantha's words sank in. "What? That's absurd. You can't possibly believe these ridiculous accusations." Amelia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Cut the crap, Dad. We know everything. The lies, the cheating, the secret family. It's all over." Richard's eyes darted back and forth, his mind clearly racing to concoct some new web of deception. "Jenna told you, didn't she? That lying little bee?" "Don't you dare!" I cut him off, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "Don't you dare try to pin this on Jenna or anyone else. This is your doing, Richard. Your lies, your betrayal." Samantha stepped forward again, her expression impassive. "We have irrefutable evidence of your misdeeds, Mr. Whittaker. Bank statements, financial records, eyewitness testimony, all of it points to a pattern of embezzlement and fraud stretching back years." Richard's face contorted in a snarl of rage. "You think you can take me down with some flimsy evidence and trumped-up charges? I'll bury you all in lawsuits, you hear me? This isn't over, not by a long shot." Amelia's laughter was cold and derisive. "Keep telling yourself that, Dad. Your days of lying and cheating are over. You're finished." As if on cue, the door to Richard's office burst open, and a trio of stern-faced security guards entered, flanked by 2 police officers. "Richard Whittaker, you're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud. You have the right to remain silent." The world seemed to slow as the officers approached, their movements deliberate and inexorable. Richard's mask of bravado crumbled, his eyes widening in panic as the gravity of the situation finally sank in. "No, wait, you don't understand," he sputtered, his hands raised in a futile gesture of surrender. "This is all a mistake. Dana, please, you have to believe me." But his pleas fell on deaf ears as the officers seized him, roughly spinning him around and snapping the handcuffs into place. As they led him away, his gaze met mine, and for a fleeting moment I saw a glimmer of the man I had once loved, the man who had promised to cherish and protect me, the man who had sworn to love me until the end of time. Then the moment passed, and all I saw was a stranger, a man consumed by greed and selfishness, a man who had sacrificed everything for his own twisted desires. And in that instant, I knew that the Richard what had loved was gone, lost forever in the tangled web of his own lies. As the door swung shut behind him, a profound silence descended upon the room, broken only by the faint sound of Amelia's ragged breathing. We had done it. We had brought Richard Whittaker to his knees, exposed his lies for the world to see. But even as a sense of grim satisfaction washed over me, I couldn't help but wonder if the price we had paid was too high. Had our quest for vengeance cost us more than we could ever hope to regain? Only time would tell. In the aftermath of Richard's arrest, a surreal calm settled over our lives. After the whirlwind of emotions and the relentless pursuit of justice, the sudden stillness felt almost suffocating. Amelia and I sat in silence, staring at the now empty space where Richard's presence had once loomed large. It was as if a weight had been lifted from our shoulders, but in its place lingered a hollow ache, the echoes of a life we had once known, now forever altered. "Do you think it was worth it?" Amelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I considered her question, turning it over in my mind like a puzzle with no clear solution. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "Part of me feels like we did the right thing, that he got what he deserved, but another part—" My voice trailed off, the words catching in my throat. Amelia nodded, her expression somber. "Yeah, I know what you mean." In the days that followed, we learned the full extent of Richard's betrayal. The embezzlement charges alone were staggering, with evidence suggesting he had siphoned off hundreds of thousands of dollars from his company over the years. But it was the personal revelations that cut deepest. The secret bank accounts, the hidden assets, the paper trail of lies that stretched back nearly a decade. Jenna, it seemed, had been just one in a long line of mistresses. a mere footnote in Richard's sordid chronicle of infidelity. And poor Lucas, that innocent child caught in the crossfire of his father's selfish actions, was left to pick up the pieces of a life he had never asked for. As the media frenzy swirled around us, Amelia and I retreated into ourselves, seeking solace in the quiet moments away from the prying eyes and endless questions. We had sacrificed so much in our pursuit of vengeance, and now that the dust had settled, we were left to confront the consequences of our choices. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Jenna standing on the doorstep, her eyes rimmed with tears. "Dana," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I just wanted to say thank you for everything." I blinked, taken aback by her unexpected gratitude. "Jenna, I don't know what to say." She shook her head, a sad smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You gave me the strength to break free, to see Richard for the monster he truly is. I'll never be able to repay that debt." As she turned to leave, I found my voice once more. "Jenna, wait." She paused, her eyes questioning. "What will you do now?" I asked. "With Lucas, I mean?" Jenna's expression hardened, a steely resolve settling over her features. "I'll raise him to be a better man than his father, to know the value of honesty, loyalty, and integrity. Richard may have given him life, but I'll make sure he never inherits his father's sins." With those words, she was gone, disappearing into the gathering dusk as abruptly as she had arrived. As I watched her retreating figure, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope amidst the lingering sadness and regret. Perhaps in the end our quest for vengeance had achieved something greater than mere retribution. Perhaps, by exposing Richard's lies and holding him accountable, we had created a ripple effect, a chance for others like Jenna and Lucas to break free from the chains of his deception and forge a better path forward. As the last rays of sunlight faded, casting long shadows across the room, I realized that our journey was far from over. The road ahead would be long and arduous, paved with difficult choices and painful realizations. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself to believe that we might just make it through. Battered and bruised, perhaps, but stronger for having weathered the storm. The weeks following Richard's arrest were a whirlwind of chaos and change. As the legal proceedings ground on, Amelia and I found ourselves thrust into the harsh glare of the media spotlight, our private lives suddenly laid bare for the world to dissect and analyze. Through it all, we clung to each other, a united front against the storm of scrutiny and judgment that seemed to rage endlessly around us. Samantha, our steadfast ally, guided us through the legal quagmire, her unwavering presence a constant source of strength and support. "It won't be easy," she warned us, her expression grave. "Richard's lawyers will fight tooth and nail to discredit you, to paint you as vindictive and irrational. You need to be prepared for that." Amelia's jaw clenched, her eyes burning with a fierce determination. "Let them try. We have the truth on our side, and that's all that matters." As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the weight of our decision began to take its toll. The sleepless nights, the endless questioning, the constant reminder of the life we had lost, it all threatened to crush us beneath its unbearable weight. But through it all, we persevered, buoyed by an unshakable belief that we had done the right thing. Richard's web of lies had been unraveled, his carefully constructed facade torn down brick by brick. He would face the consequences of his actions, no matter how long or arduous the road ahead might be. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the day of reckoning arrived. Richard, his once confident demeanor replaced by a pallid, haunted expression, stood before the judge, his fate hanging in the balance. As the charges were read aloud, embezzlement, fraud, adultery, a hush fell over the courtroom. Even the most seasoned journalists and legal experts seemed taken aback by the sheer magnitude of his misdeeds. Amelia and I sat in the front row, our hands clasped together in a silent show of solidarity. Jenna was there too, her eyes fixed on Richard with a mixture of anger and pity. When the verdict was finally announced, guilty on all counts, a collective gasp rippled through the room. Richard's shoulders slumped, his head bowing in defeat as the weight of his sins finally came crashing down upon him. In the aftermath, as the media circus swirled around us once more, Amelia and I found ourselves clinging to each other, tears of relief and sorrow mingling on our cheeks. "It's over," Amelia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's finally over." I nodded, my throat constricted by a torrent of conflicting emotions. The road ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could see a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. In the days and weeks that followed, we began to piece our lives back together, one fragile step at a time. Jenna, her custody of Lucas secured, reached out to us, and an unlikely bond of understanding began to form. We were survivors, united by the scars of Richard's betrayal, but determined to forge a new path forward. As for Richard, his fate was sealed. A lengthy prison sentence, his once promising future reduced to a mere footnote in the annals of his own hubris and greed. But even as the world around us moved on, the echoes of our ordeal lingered, a constant reminder of the price we had paid for justice. The road to healing would be long and arduous, paved with difficult choices and painful realizations. Yet, as I stood on the precipice of this new chapter, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope, a belief that, no matter how dark the night might seem, the dawn would eventually break, ushering in a new era of peace and redemption. For in the end, that was the true legacy of our quest for vengeance. Not the destruction of one man, but the reclamation of our own strength, our own resilience, our own indomitable spirit. And as the first rays of sunlight peeked over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the room, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, united in our determination to forge a brighter future, one built on the ashes of the past, but rising ever higher toward the promise of a new dawn.